They found her dying in a burlap sack, beaten, and left for the crows under a Wyoming sycamore. The cowboy who saved her didn't know her name, didn't know her past, but his 4-year-old daughter looked into those bruised eyes and whispered the words that would change everything. "Papa, she's Mama." What began as an act of mercy became a fight for truth, justice, and a love that defied every law written. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Jonas McCord found the girl in the sack, the sky over western Wyoming burned the color of old copper. It was the kind of dawn that made a man believe God still painted, still cared about the details. Jonas didn't consider himself a religious man, not after Martha died bringing Clara into the world, but riding the fence line at sunrise with his daughter perched in front of him, her small hands gripping the saddle horn, he sometimes felt something close to grace. "Papa, the wind is singing," Clara said, her voice barely louder than the breeze itself. Jonas smiled despite himself. At 4 years old, his daughter still believed the world spoke in whispers only she could hear. The other ranchers' wives in Red Willow thought her odd, too quiet, too dreamy. But Jonas understood. When you lose your mother before you can remember her face, you learn to find comfort in things that don't leave. "What's it singing about, little bird?" he asked, guiding his horse, Samson, along the weathered fence posts. "About someone sleeping," Clara said, tilting her head like she was straining to hear. "Someone who's very, very tired." Jonas felt the hair on the back of his neck prickle. Clara had a way of knowing things, sensing storms before the clouds gathered, feeling when the cattle were restless. Martha had been the same way. He'd learned not to dismiss his daughter's instincts. They rode in comfortable silence for another quarter mile, checking for breaks in the wire, watching for signs of predators. The McCord Ranch wasn't the biggest spread in Carbon County, but it was honest land, earned through sweat and stubbornness. Jonas had built it with his own hands, post by post, hoping to give Clara the kind of life where she could grow wild and free, unbroken by the harshness that took so many frontier children. That's when he saw it. Under the sprawling arms of the old sycamore tree, the one Martha used to paint during their courting days, something large and dark lay crumpled against the trunk. At first, Jonas thought it was a dead animal, maybe a deer brought down by wolves. But as Samson drew closer, his steps careful and measured, Jonas's stomach twisted into a cold knot. It was a burlap sack, a large one, stained dark with something that looked too much like dried blood. And it was moving. "Papa?" Clara's voice was small, uncertain. Jonas's hand instinctively went to the rifle in his saddle scabbard, but he didn't draw it. Whatever was in that sack wasn't a threat, it was dying. He could see the shallow, desperate movements, the way the fabric rose and fell with labored breathing. "Stay on the horse, Clara," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't you move, understand?" "Yes, Papa." Jonas dismounted, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. The morning was eerily quiet now. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, just the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears and that terrible, rattling breathing coming from inside the sack. He approached slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal, ready for it to lash out in fear and pain. Up close, he could see the stains weren't just blood. There was dirt, grass, and what looked like char marks, as if the sack had been near fire. "Hello?" Jonas called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Can you hear me?" The movement inside the sack intensified, frantic, desperate. He heard a muffled sound, something between a whimper and a scream, choked off by what he could only imagine was a gag. Jonas pulled his knife from his belt, the blade catching the morning light. "I'm going to cut you free," he said, not knowing if whoever was inside could even hear him. "Don't be afraid." The burlap was thick and coarse, tied at the top with rough hemp rope that had been knotted multiple times. Whoever had done this had wanted to make damn sure their victim couldn't escape. Jonas sawed through the rope with quick, efficient strokes, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. When the rope finally gave way, he pulled open the mouth of the sack. The smell hit him first, blood, sweat, fear, and the acrid stench of urine. Then he saw her. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, maybe younger. It was hard to tell beneath the bruises that covered her face like a grotesque mask. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, purple and black and weeping. Her lip was split, crusted with dried blood. Dark hair, matted with dirt and blood, fell across her face in tangles. But it was her eyes, the one that could still open, that stopped Jonas cold. Dark brown, almost black, filled with a terror so profound it seemed to reach right into his soul and twist. She was bound, wrists tied behind her back with the same rough rope, so tight that the skin had rubbed raw and bloody. A filthy rag had been stuffed into her mouth and tied in place, and when Jonas saw it, saw the way her chest heaved as she struggled to breathe through her broken nose, something inside him cracked wide open. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Behind him, he heard Clara gasp. He'd forgotten. She was still there, still watching. "Papa?" his daughter said, and there was something in her voice that made Jonas turn around. Clara had climbed down from Samson on her own, something she knew she wasn't supposed to do. She stood there in her little calico dress, the one with the yellow flowers that had been Martha's favorite, and she was staring at the woman with an expression Jonas had never seen on her face before. Wonder, recognition, joy. "Clara, get back," Jonas started. But his daughter was already moving, running toward them with her arms outstretched, her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Mama!" Clara cried. "Papa, it's Mama! You found Mama!" The world seemed to stop spinning. Jonas felt like he'd been kicked in the chest by a mule. The woman in the sack, bloodied, broken, a complete stranger, stared at Clara with her one good eye, and something flickered there. Confusion, pain, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like hope. "Clara, no," Jonas said, his voice hoarse. She's not." But Clara was already there, dropping to her knees beside the woman, her small hands reaching out to touch the stranger's bruised face with infinite gentleness. "You came back," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I knew you would. I told the wind to bring you back, and it did." The woman made a sound behind the gag, a broken, desperate sound that could have been a sob or a scream or both. Jonas couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be true. Martha was dead, had been dead for 4 years. He'd buried her himself in the little cemetery on the hill, under the cottonwood tree where they'd shared their first kiss. This woman, this stranger, wasn't her, couldn't be her. But Clara was holding her like she'd found something precious and long lost, and the woman was leaning into that touch like it was the first kindness she'd known in a lifetime. "We need to get her out of there," Jonas heard himself say, his voice sounding strange and distant. "Clara, step back, sweetheart. Let me help her." Clara obeyed reluctantly, moving back just enough to give Jonas room to work. He reached behind the woman, his hands gentle but efficient as he cut through the ropes binding her wrists. The moment she was free, her arms came around, slow, shaking, and she pulled the gag from her mouth herself, coughing and gasping as air filled her lungs properly for the first time in God knew how long. "Easy," Jonas said softly. "Easy now. You're safe." She tried to speak, but nothing came out except a hoarse croak. Her throat was bruised too, Jonas realized with a fresh wave of fury. Someone had choked her, had beaten her, had stuffed her in a sack like garbage and left her under this tree to die alone and forgotten. "Don't try to talk," Jonas said. "Can you move? Can you stand?" She shook her head, tears cutting clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. Her legs were still trapped in the bottom of the sack, and when Jonas carefully pulled the burlap away, he understood why. Her ankles were bound too, and beneath her torn and filthy dress, he could see more bruises, more evidence of violence that made his blood boil. "All right," he said, making a decision. "I'm going to carry you. It might hurt, but we need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere warm. Can you trust me to do that?" The woman looked at him for a long moment, her one open eye searching his face for something, deceit, danger, another betrayal. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she gave a tiny nod. Jonas cut the rope around her ankles, then slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. She was lighter than he expected, too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. When he lifted her, she made a small sound of pain but didn't cry out. Tough, he thought. Whoever she was, whatever she'd been through, she was a fighter. "Clara," Climb back up on Samson, Jonas instructed. We're going home. Is Mama coming home with us? Clara asked, her face still bright with that inexplicable joy. Jonas looked down at the woman in his arms, at her bruised face and frightened eyes, and he made another decision, one that would change the course of all their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Yes, he said. Yes, she's coming home. The ride back to the ranch house seemed to take forever and no time at all. Jonas walked beside Samson, the woman cradled against his chest, while Clara chattered away from the saddle about all the things Mama had missed. The garden, the new calf, the picture Clara had drawn with charcoal on the barn wall that Papa had pretended to be mad about, but actually liked. The woman didn't respond, didn't react, just stared ahead with that 1,000-yard look Jonas had seen in soldiers who'd been through hell and couldn't quite find their way back. By the time they reached the ranch house, a modest structure of weathered wood and stone that Jonas had built with his own hands, the morning sun was fully up, turning the scrubland golden. It should have been beautiful, but Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had followed them home, something that wasn't finished with the woman he carried. He brought her straight inside, past the small living area with its stone fireplace and handmade furniture, past the kitchen with its cast-iron stove, and Clara's drawing stuck to the wall with pine sap, and into his own bedroom, the only room in the house with a proper bed and a door that locked. "I'm going to put you down now," he said softly, and she nodded, her arms tightening briefly around his neck before she let go. The bed creaked as he laid her down on the quilt Martha had stitched during her pregnancy, each square a different pattern, a different story. The woman sank into it like she'd forgotten what softness felt like, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment before snapping open again, wide with fear. "You're safe," Jonas repeated, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Whatever happened to you, whoever did this, they're not here. You're safe." Clara appeared in the doorway, carrying the water pitcher from the kitchen. "Mama needs water, Papa," she said matter-of-factly. "And we should wash her face. That's what you do when someone's hurt. Mama told me that." Jonas felt his throat tighten. Martha had told Clara that years ago, when Clara had scraped her knee and Martha had cleaned the wound with such tenderness, singing softly while she worked. How did his daughter remember these things? How did she carry her mother inside her when she'd never really known her? "That's right, little bird," he said roughly. "Get a clean cloth from the drawer, and the tin of salve from the medicine box." While Clara scurried off on her mission, Jonas poured water into the wash basin and brought it to the bedside. The woman watched him with that wary, frightened look, like she expected him to hurt her at any moment. "I'm just going to clean some of these cuts," Jonas said. "If I hurt you, you tell me and I'll stop, all right?" She nodded, barely. Jonas had tended wounds before, his own, the ranch hands, even animals when necessary. But this felt different. Each time the cloth touched her skin and came away bloody, each time she flinched but didn't cry out, he felt a deeper rage building in his gut. Someone had done this to her deliberately, had enjoyed it, maybe. The bruises were too methodical, too carefully placed. This wasn't a random attack, this was punishment. Clara returned with the cloth and the salve, climbing up onto the bed with the easy confidence of a child who knows she's loved. The woman stiffened at first, but when Clara began humming, a lullaby Jonas used to sing, one Martha had taught him, she slowly relaxed. "You're going to be okay, Mama," Clara said, patting the woman's hand with her small one. "Papa's real good at fixing things. He fixed my doll when her arm came off, and he fixed the roof when the storm broke it, and he'll fix you too." The woman's lip trembled. A tear slipped from her good eye, rolling down to soak into the pillow. "Clara," Jonas said gently, "why don't you go get Mama's shawl? The blue one in the trunk. I think our guest might be cold." It wasn't a suggestion, but a dismissal, and Clara knew it. She pouted slightly, but obeyed, sliding off the bed and running out of the room. Once she was gone, Jonas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice low and serious. "I need to know," he said. "Did someone do this to you, or are they still after you? Do I need to be ready for trouble?" The woman opened her mouth, tried to speak, but only a harsh whisper came out. Her throat was too damaged. Jonas grabbed the water glass and held it to her lips, helping her drink. She took 3 small sips before pulling back, gasping. Don't know, she finally managed, her voice like gravel. "Can't remember." Jonas sat back, studying her face. Amnesia. It happened sometimes with head injuries, and she certainly had enough of those. But it could also be shock, trauma so severe the mind simply shut down to protect itself. "Do you remember your name?" he asked. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowing with concentration. After a long moment, she shook her head, fresh tears forming. "No, nothing. I don't know who I am." "All right," Jonas said. "That's all right. It might come back. Do you remember what happened to you? How you ended up in that sack?" Again, that look of intense concentration, followed by frustration and fear. Pieces, fire, smoke, running, hands grabbing me, pain, then darkness, cold, can't breathe. And then your daughter's voice, Claire's voice. The wind is singing about someone who's very, very tired. How had his daughter known? How had she led him straight to this woman, as if some invisible thread connected them? "I need to tell you something," Jonas said carefully. "My daughter, Clara, she lost her mother 4 years ago, childbirth. Clara never knew her, not really, but I've told her stories, showed her pictures. And now she thinks you're Martha, my late wife." The woman's eye widened. I can't be." "I know," Jonas said quickly. "I know you're not her, but Clara wants you to be. She's wanted a mother for so long, and somehow, some way, she's decided you're the answer to that wish. I'll set her straight eventually, when the time is right. But for now, while you're healing, while we figure out who you are and what happened, would you mind if she calls you that? Would you mind letting a little girl pretend just for a while?" The woman stared at him for a long moment, searching his face. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. "You don't know me. I could be dangerous." Jonas smiled grimly. "Maybe. But someone beat you half to death and left you in a sack to die. That tells me everything I need to know about who the real danger is. And whoever they are, they're not welcome on my land. If I stay here, I might bring trouble to you, to your daughter." "Then I'll handle the trouble," Jonas said simply. "That's what I do. I protect what's mine. And right now, you're under my roof. That makes you mine to protect." Something in the woman's face crumbled. She turned her head into the pillow, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jonas wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but he didn't know if touch was what she needed. So he just sat there, a steady presence, until the crying stopped and exhaustion claimed her, pulling her down into sleep. Clara appeared in the doorway, the blue shawl clutched in her hands. "Is Mama sleeping?" she whispered. "Yes, little bird. She's very tired." "Will she wake up again?" There was a tremor of fear in Clara's voice, and Jonas realized what she was really asking. "Will she leave like the other Mama? Will I lose her too?" "She'll wake up," Jonas promised, "and we're going to take care of her until she's strong again, all right?" Clara nodded, her face brightening. "I can help. I'm a good helper." "You're the best helper in all of Wyoming," Jonas agreed. "But right now, I need you to help by playing quietly. Our guest needs rest." "Her name is Mama," Clara insisted. "Her name is—" Jonas stopped. What was her name? She couldn't remember, and he couldn't just keep calling her the woman or our guest. "We'll give her a name," he decided. "Something pretty, something that suits her. But until she remembers her real name, we'll call her Rose, like the wild roses that grow by the creek." "Rosie," Clara said, trying it out. "I like Rosie. Can I call her Rosie Mama?" "Just Rosie for now," Jonas said. "Come on, let's let her rest." He ushered Clara out of the room, closing the door softly behind them. Through the kitchen window, he could see the sun climbing higher, the day opening up bright and clear. But Jonas McCord knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones like winter cold, that something had changed, something fundamental had shifted in the world, and there was no going back. By midday, word had spread through Red Willow like wildfire. Jonas had known it would. Nothing stayed secret in a frontier town where gossip was the primary form of entertainment. He'd sent Clara to the Johnsons' place down the road to fetch Mrs. Johnson, who had nursing experience and could properly tend to Rosie's injuries. Mrs. Johnson had taken one look at the girl and immediately begun asking questions Jonas couldn't answer. Where had she come from? Who had hurt her? Had Jonas informed Sheriff Dawson? Did he know anything about her? "She's under my protection," was all Jonas would say. "That's all that matters." Mrs. Johnson had clucked her tongue disapprovingly, but set to work cleaning and binding Rosie's wounds, applying poultices to the worst bruises, checking for broken bones. Aside from the visible injuries, there were older scars, the kind that spoke of a hard life. Small burns on her hands, thin white lines on her arms, calluses that suggested manual labor. This was no pampered city girl, Jonas realized. This was someone who'd worked, who'd survived things before this latest horror. By the time Mrs. Johnson finished, Rosie was sleeping again, tucked under quilts with her bruised face finally cleaned of blood and dirt. In sleep, she looked younger, vulnerable. Jonas found himself wondering what she'd looked like before the beating, what color her eyes were when they weren't swollen shut, what her smile might be like. Dangerous thoughts for a widower who'd sworn never to let another woman into his heart. "She'll need careful watching, Mrs." Johnson said, washing her hands in the basin. "Those head injuries are tricky. She could take a turn for the worse." And Jonas, the older woman's face was troubled. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this deliberately, someone cruel. If they come looking for her, "They'll find me waiting," Jonas said coldly, "and I won't be welcoming." Mrs. Johnson sighed. "You've got Clara to think about. Don't go being a hero and leaving that child an orphan." "I'm thinking about Clara," Jonas said. "Clara found her. Clara wants her to stay. And I'm not in the habit of turning away people who need help." "The town's going to talk," Mrs. Johnson warned. "Let them talk." And talk they did. By evening, half of Red Willow had found excuses to ride out to the McCord Ranch. Some brought food, casseroles and pies and bread, pretending it was Christian charity while their eyes scanned the house hungrily, looking for a glimpse of the mysterious woman. Others were more direct, like Tom Henderson, who owned the feed store and fancied himself the town's moral compass. "Jonas, you can't keep a strange woman in your house," Tom said, his thumbs hooked in his suspenders. "It ain't proper. You got a young daughter to think about." "My daughter's fine," Jonas said from the porch, not inviting Tom any closer. "The woman needs help. I'm providing it." "But who is she? Where'd she come from? For all you know, she could be a criminal, could be running from the law." "Could be running from something worse than the law," Jonas countered. "You see what was done to her? Someone beat her near to death and left her to die. I'm not about to hand her over to whoever did that." "Then hand her over to Sheriff Dawson," Tom pressed. "Let him sort it out proper. When she's strong enough to talk, when she remembers something useful, then I'll talk to the sheriff," Jonas said. "Until then, she stays here, under my protection." Tom's face reddened. "People are going to think things, Jonas, about you and this woman, about what goes on in this house." Jonas's hand moved to the rifle propped beside the door. Not a threat, just a reminder. "Let them think what they want. Now get off my property, Tom. And tell the rest of the gossips they're not welcome here unless they're bringing something useful." Tom left in a huff, but Jonas knew it wouldn't be the last visit. The town was divided, some admiring his charity, others suspicious and afraid. Fear made people cruel, and there was nothing people feared more than the unknown. As the sun set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of purple and gold, Jonas sat on the porch with Clara in his lap. Inside, Rosie slept, her breathing finally steady and even. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dust. "Papa," Clara said sleepily, "is Rosie Mama going to stay forever?" "I don't know, little bird," Jonas said honestly. "She doesn't remember who she is or where she came from. Once she remembers, she might want to go home." "But this is her home," Clara insisted. "The wind told me. She belongs here. With us." Jonas kissed the top of his daughter's head, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and sunshine and innocence. "Maybe you're right. Maybe the wind knows things we don't." "It does," Clara said with absolute certainty. "It always knows." As darkness fell over the ranch, Jonas carried Clara to her bed, tucking her in with the stuffed horse she'd had since birth. Then he returned to check on Rosie, easing the bedroom door open quietly. She was awake, staring at the ceiling with her one good eye. When she heard him, she turned her head, and Jonas saw the fear there. The same fear she'd had when he'd first opened that sack. "Just checking on you," he said softly. "Do you need anything? Water? Food?" "Why?" she whispered, her damaged voice barely carrying across the room. "Why are you doing this?" Jonas leaned against the doorframe, considering his answer. "Because someone has to," he finally said. "Because I found you and I can't unfind you. Because my daughter believes you're supposed to be here. And maybe because I know what it's like to feel alone in the world." "Your wife," Rosie said. "Clara said—" "Martha died bringing Clara into the world," Jonas said. "The old pain is familiar as an old scar. For 4 years, it's just been Clara and me against everything. She's never had a mother to hold her, to teach her the things daughters need to learn. And now you're here, and for reasons I don't understand, Clara's decided you're the answer to every prayer she's ever whispered to the wind." "I'm not her mother," Rosie said, tears welling up again. "I don't even know who I am." "Then stay until you remember," Jonas said. "Stay until you're strong enough to face whatever's waiting out there. And in the meantime, let a little girl pretend she's got a mother who came back to her. Would that be so terrible?" Rosie closed her eyes, more tears escaping. "What if I never remember? What if I'm running from something I deserve? What if I'm a bad person?" "Bad people don't worry about being bad people," Jonas said. "Now try to sleep. Tomorrow's a new day, and who knows? Maybe you'll wake up and remember everything." He started to close the door, but Rosie's voice stopped him. "Jonas?" It was the first time she'd used his name. "Thank you for not leaving me there to die." "Anyone would have done the same," Jonas said. "No," Rosie said softly. "They wouldn't have. But you did." Jonas didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and closed the door, leaving her to her rest and her demons. That night, lying in the spare room on a bedroll because Rosie had his bed, Jonas stared at the ceiling and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He'd invited a complete stranger into his home, a woman who couldn't remember her own name, who might be running from the law or from something worse. He'd made himself responsible for her safety, had put himself between her and whatever darkness had tried to swallow her whole, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. Because Jonas McCord had learned early in life that you were defined not by what you took from the world, but by what you gave. His father had taught him that before a Cheyenne raid had taken both his parents when Jonas was 15. Martha had reinforced it during their brief, brilliant marriage, and Clara reminded him of it every single day with her open heart and her belief that the wind carried messages from heaven. Outside, an owl hooted. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind rattled the shutters, and Jonas closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the Wyoming night lull him toward sleep. Tomorrow, he'd face whatever came. The gossip, the questions, the fear that Rosie had brought danger to his door. Tomorrow, he'd be strong enough to handle it all. But tonight, he just listened to the wind and wondered if his daughter was right. If maybe, just maybe, the wind really did know things they didn't. If maybe it had brought Rosie here for a reason none of them could yet understand. In the bedroom down the hall, Rosie lay awake, her body aching with every breath, her mind a blank canvas of terror and confusion. She didn't know who she was, didn't know where she came from, didn't know what she'd done to deserve being beaten and left for dead. But she knew 3 things with absolute certainty. She was afraid. She was grateful. And somewhere in the darkness of her forgotten past, something terrible was waiting. Something that wouldn't stay buried forever. Something that would come looking for the girl who'd survived when she was supposed to die. And when it came, Jonas McCord and his daughter would be standing right in its path. 3 days passed before Rosie could stand without Jonas's help, and even then her legs trembled like a newborn colt's. The bruises on her face had begun their slow transformation from purple-black to yellow-green, the swelling around her eye receding enough that she could finally see clearly from both sides. But the damage went deeper than bruises and broken skin. Jonas could see it in the way she startled at sudden sounds, the way her hand would fly to her throat whenever anyone approached too quickly, the way she'd wake in the night screaming words that made no sense, fragments of terror from a past she couldn't quite grasp. Clara appointed herself Rosie's constant companion and chief protector. The little girl would sit beside the bed for hours, chattering away about everything and nothing, telling stories about the ranch and the animals and the clouds that looked like horses. She'd bring wildflowers in mason jars, their petals already wilting by the time they reached the bedside. She'd hum the lullabies Jonas had taught her, the same ones Martha used to sing, and sometimes Rosie would hum along, her damaged voice finding the melody, even when she couldn't remember the words. On the fourth morning, Jonas found Rosie sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in Martha's blue shawl, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Clara had made. More milk and sugar than coffee, but Rosie drank it like it was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. "You should be resting," Jonas said, though he couldn't hide his relief at seeing her up and moving. "I've rested enough," Rosie said, her voice still rough but stronger. "I need to be useful. Need to do something other than lie there remembering things that aren't memories." Jonas poured himself coffee and sat across from her. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, he could hear Clara singing to the chickens as she scattered their feed. "What do you mean, things that aren't memories?" he asked. Rosie's hands tightened around the cup. "Pieces. Fragments. A woman's face, but I don't know her name. The smell of smoke, but I can't remember the fire. Hands holding me down, but the faces are blurred. And fear. Always fear. Like something terrible is coming and I can't run fast enough to escape it." "The doctor from town is coming today," Jonas said. "Maybe he can help. Head injuries are tricky things." "And if he can't help?" Rosie looked at him with those dark eyes that had started to haunt Jonas's dreams. "What if I never remember? What if I'm stuck like this forever, not knowing who I am or what I did to deserve—" Her voice broke. "You didn't deserve what happened to you," Jonas said firmly. "Nobody deserves that. And whoever did it, if they come around here, they'll answer to me." The door burst open and Clara came running in, her dress muddy at the hem, her face alight with joy. "Rosie Mama, you're up." "Papa, can Rosie Mama help me gather eggs? I'll show her where the mean hen lays hers, the one who pecks." "Clara, I've told you," Jonas started, but Rosie was already smiling, the first real smile Jonas had seen from her, and it transformed her whole face despite the bruises. "I'd love to help you gather eggs," Rosie said softly, "if your papa thinks I'm strong enough." "You sure you're ready for that?" Jonas asked. "Clara's mean hen is a terror." "I'm tougher than I look," Rosie said, and there was steel beneath the softness, a hint of whoever she'd been before the burlap sack. Jonas watched them go, Clara's small hand wrapped around Rosie's as she led her outside, chattering excitedly about the pecking order of the henhouse and which chickens had personalities and which ones were just chicken-brained. Through the window, he saw Rosie stumble once, saw Clara steady her with surprising strength for such a small child, saw them continue on together like they'd been doing this dance for years instead of days. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his observation. Jonas stepped onto the porch to see not Dr. Morrison's buggy, but Sheriff Tom Dawson's horse, accompanied by 3 other riders. Jonas's hand instinctively moved to the rifle beside the door. Dawson was a good man, fair and honest, but the men with him, Jonas recognized 2 of them as Henderson's friends from town, the kind who thought a badge gave them authority they didn't have. The third was a stranger, dressed too well for Red Willow, with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen violence and dealt it back. "Morning, Jonas," Dawson said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose joints ached. "Mind if we have a word?" "Depends on what the word's about," Jonas said evenly. The stranger stepped forward. "My name is Detective Marcus Webb, out of Cheyenne. I'm investigating a crime that occurred 3 weeks ago at the Hollow Creek Orphanage. There was a fire. 2 people died. We're looking for a young woman who was seen fleeing the scene, a woman matching the description of the one you're harboring." Jonas felt ice form in his chest. Harboring is a strong word for helping an injured woman. "A woman you know nothing about," one of Henderson's friends interjected. "Could be a murderer, Jonas. Could be dangerous." "Could be innocent," Jonas shot back. "Could be running from the real danger." "That's what we're here to determine," Webb said, his voice smooth as oil. "I need to speak with her. Ask her some questions, see if she is who I think she is." "She can't remember anything," Jonas said. "Head injury, amnesia." Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How convenient. Still, I need to see her, confirm her identity. If she's not who we're looking for, then there's no problem. But if she is..." He let the threat hang in the air. She's under my protection, Jonas said, and she's not going anywhere until she's healed. You want to ask her questions? You ask them with me present. And if she can't answer, you leave her be. Understood? Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Jonas, if she's wanted for murder, if she's wanted for anything, there'll be time enough to sort it out when she's not half dead from a beating, Jonas interrupted. Or did you forget someone tried to kill her? Seems to me that's the crime we should be investigating. Webb's jaw tightened. Where is she? Jonas didn't answer, didn't move. The standoff might have escalated if Clara's voice hadn't cut through the tension like a knife. Papa! Papa! The mean hen got Rosie, Mama! Jonas was moving before his brain caught up, rushing around the side of the house to find Rosie on the ground, Clara kneeling beside her, and the angriest rooster in Wyoming territory strutting around like he'd won a battle. Rosie's hand was bleeding where the rooster had gotten her, and she was laughing, actually laughing, while Clara scolded the bird in a voice that sounded exactly like Martha's. You bad, bad chicken! She was just trying to help! Jonas scooped up the rooster with practiced ease, tossing it back toward the henhouse. Then he helped Rosie to her feet, noting how her laughter died the moment she saw the men on horseback, how her whole body went rigid with fear. It's all right, Jonas said quietly. I won't let them hurt you. But Rosie wasn't looking at the sheriff or his deputies. She was staring at Webb with an expression Jonas couldn't quite read. Fear, yes, but also something like recognition, something like rage. You, she whispered. I know you. Webb's face revealed nothing. Do you? What's your name, girl? Rosie's hand went to her throat, that unconscious gesture Jonas had seen 100 times now. I don't remember, Webb finished, or don't want to say. Because the woman I'm looking for, Rosie Bellamy, she'd have plenty of reasons to pretend she didn't remember. Arson, manslaughter, theft of orphanage records. That woman would hang if she was caught. That's enough, Jonas snapped. You can see she's injured. You can see she's been through hell. Whatever you think she did, what I think doesn't matter, Webb said coldly. What matters is what I can prove. And I can prove that Rosie Bellamy stole ledgers from Hollow Creek, set fire to the building to cover her tracks, and ran when 2 people died in that fire. I can prove she was seen fleeing north, and I can prove that she'd do anything to avoid justice, including manipulating a lonely widower and his daughter. Clara made a sound like a wounded animal. Jonas felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Get off my land, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Now. Jonas, Dawson started. Now, Jonas roared. Before I forget, you're wearing that badge, and remember you're standing on my property making threats. Webb held up his hands in mock surrender. We'll go, but this isn't over. I'll be back with a warrant, and when I come back, Mr. McCord, I'll be taking her with me, whether you like it or not. They rode off, dust rising behind them like smoke. Jonas stood there, his arm around Rosie's trembling shoulders. Clara pressed against his other side and watched until they disappeared down the road. Is it true? Jonas asked finally. Are you Rosie Bellamy? I don't know, she whispered. But when I saw his face, Jonas, when I saw him, I felt it. The fear. Like my body remembered even if my mind doesn't. And the fire, God, I can smell it now. Smoke and burning wood and something else. Something terrible. We need to get you inside, Jonas said, and then you need to tell me everything you remember, even if it's just pieces, because that man is coming back, and when he does, we need to be ready. Inside the house, with Clara sent to her room to play despite her protests, Jonas sat Rosie down at the kitchen table and bandaged her hand where the rooster had gotten her. The cut wasn't deep, but her hands were shaking so badly he had to hold them steady. Start from the beginning, he said, or as close to the beginning as you can get. Rosie closed her eyes, her face screwed up in concentration. There was a building, big, old, gray stone walls and windows with bars. Not a prison, but it felt like one. Cold, always cold, even in summer. And children. So many children, but quiet. Too quiet. Like they'd learned that noise got you punished. The orphanage, Jonas said. Yes, Hollow Creek. I know that name. It's part of me somehow. I worked there maybe, or lived there. I can feel the floorboards under my feet, hear the way they creaked in the west hallway. There was a woman, tall, thin, her face is blurred, but I remember her hands. She wore rings, heavy rings that left marks when she hit you. Jonas felt sick. She hit the children? Everyone. The children, the staff, anyone who questioned her. Mrs. something, I can't. Rosie's breath came faster, her chest heaving. She was selling them. The children. I found the books, the ledgers, names and dates and amounts of money. Children sold like cattle. And when I tried to, she couldn't continue. Tears streamed down her face, her whole body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Easy, Jonas said, taking her hands again. Easy now. You don't have to remember it all at once. But I have to, Rosie gasped. Because if I'm her, if I'm this Rosie Bellamy he's looking for, then I set that fire. I killed people, and maybe I deserve to hang. Or maybe you were trying to stop something evil and it went wrong, Jonas said firmly. Maybe you're not the criminal here. Maybe you're the witness they want to silence. Rosie looked at him with hope and horror warring in her eyes. You can't know that. I know enough, Jonas said. I know someone beat you nearly to death and left you to die. I know that detective out there didn't seem surprised to find you, almost like he knew where to look, almost like someone told him exactly where you'd be. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the fire at Hollow Creek wasn't an accident or arson. Maybe it was murder, and maybe they've been hunting you ever since because you know the truth. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Before Rosie could respond, there was a knock at the door, softer this time, tentative. Jonas opened it to find Dr. Morrison, his medical bag in hand and his face troubled. Heard about the commotion, the old doctor said. Thought I'd best come check on your patient. And Jonas, there's something you should know. Henderson's gathering folks in town, talking about coming out here, taking the girl by force if necessary. Says she's dangerous. Says you're being fooled. Let them come, Jonas said coldly. Jonas, these are your neighbors, your friends. Friends don't form mobs, Jonas said. Now, are you here to help or to lecture? Morrison sighed and came inside, setting his bag on the table. He examined Rosie with gentle efficiency, checking her pupils, testing her reflexes, probing the bruises with careful fingers. When he was done, he sat back and shook his head. Physically, she's healing well, but the head injury, amnesia from trauma can be temporary or permanent. There's no way to know. Sometimes a shock can bring memories back. Sometimes they never return. He looked at Rosie kindly. I'm sorry I can't give you better news, child. Can you tell them that? Jonas asked. Can you tell the sheriff that she's not faking, that she genuinely can't remember? I can tell them, Morrison said, but I don't know if they'll listen. Fear makes people deaf to reason. He packed up his bag and stood. You're doing a good thing here, Jonas, but be careful. Good deeds have a way of getting punished in this world. After the doctor left, Jonas barred the door and checked the windows. The afternoon sun was slanting low, painting everything gold and amber. In her room, Clara was singing softly, unaware of the storm gathering around them. You should run, Rosie said suddenly. You should take Clara and go somewhere safe. I'll turn myself in. I'll face whatever... No, Jonas said flatly. But Clara found you. Clara chose you. And I'm not in the habit of abandoning people who need help, no matter what trouble it brings. He sat down across from her, his face serious. But I need you to promise me something. I need you to keep trying to remember. Because the only way we survive this is if we know the truth. All of it. I'll try, Rosie whispered. But Jonas, what if the truth is worse than not knowing? Then we'll face it together, he said. You, me, and Clara. Whatever comes. That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, watching the road for any sign of torches or riders. The moon rose full and bright, turning the landscape silver and strange. Around midnight, Rosie emerged from the bedroom, unable to sleep either. I remember something else, she said quietly, sitting beside him. A man. Young, kind face. He worked at the orphanage, too. He's the one who told me about the ledgers. Said they were hidden in Mrs. Crowley's office. That's her name, Mrs. Crowley. He wanted to expose her, but was afraid. So I went in during the night, stole the books, and then, fire. Someone set fire to the building while I was inside. The smoke. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see. I heard screaming, children screaming. I tried to get to them, but the fire was everywhere. And then hands grabbed me, dragged me out. I thought they were saving me, but her hand went to her throat again. They weren't. They were taking me somewhere dark, and then the beating started. Who beat you? Jonas asked gently. I don't know, couldn't see their faces. Multiple people, taking turns, asking where I hid the ledgers. I tried to tell them they were in the fire, but they didn't believe me, kept hitting me, choking me, until everything went black. And then they put you in the sack. I woke up in the dark, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I thought I was buried alive. I thought... She was shaking again. If Clara hadn't found me, if you hadn't stopped... Jonas put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She stiffened for just a moment before relaxing into the comfort, her head resting against his chest. He could feel her heart racing, could feel the tremors that ran through her body. You're safe now, he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. I won't let them take you. They sat like that for hours, watching the night, waiting for dawn or danger, whichever came first. Clara found them there in the morning, still sitting by the window, Rosie asleep against Jonas's shoulder, and Jonas's eyes red from staying awake. Papa, Clara whispered, is Rosie Mama going to leave? Not if I can help it, Jonas said. Good, Clara said simply. Because the wind says she belongs here. Says she's supposed to stay forever. Jonas looked down at the woman sleeping against him, at the bruises that were slowly fading, at the face that was becoming less a stranger's and more something else, something dangerous to contemplate. Maybe the wind's right, he said softly. The next days passed in tense anticipation. Jonas kept watch, kept his rifle close, kept Rosie and Clara within sight at all times. Neighbors who'd been friendly before now rode past without waving. Henderson spread his poison through town, painting Rosie as a murderer and Jonas as a fool. The sheriff sent word that Webb was gathering evidence, preparing a warrant. And through it all, Rosie's memories kept returning in fragments. She remembered the orphanage's layout, could draw a map of the rooms from memory. She remembered children's names, Emily, Thomas, little Sarah who never spoke. She remembered the young man who'd helped her, Daniel something, with sandy hair and a crooked smile, who'd disappeared the night of the fire. She remembered Mrs. Crowley's face now, hard and cruel and wealthy, beyond what an orphanage matron should be. But she couldn't remember who she'd been before Hollow Creek, couldn't remember her family or her past. It was like her life had started the day she arrived at that terrible place and ended the night it burned. On the 7th day after Webb's visit, Clara came running from the barn where she'd been playing, her face pale with fear. Papa! Papa! There are men coming! Lots of men! Jonas grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch. Down the road he could see them, at least 20 riders, maybe more. Some carried torches despite the daylight, some carried rifles. At their head rode Webb, Henderson, and reluctantly Sheriff Dawson. Rosie appeared behind Jonas, her face set with grim determination. I won't let them hurt you or Clara because of me. I'll go with them. Like hell you will, Jonas said. Jonas, there are too many. I don't care if there's 100, Jonas said. They want you. They go through me first. Clara grabbed Rosie's hand, holding tight. You're not leaving. You're my mama. Mamas don't leave. The riders stopped at the edge of Jonas's property. Webb rode forward alone, holding up a paper. Jonas McCord, he called. I have a warrant for the arrest of Rosie Bellamy, wanted for arson and manslaughter. Hand her over and there doesn't have to be trouble. There's already trouble, Jonas called back. You brought it. Now turn around and get off my land. Can't do that, Webb said. This is the law. You're harboring a criminal. I'm protecting an innocent woman who was beaten and left for dead, Jonas corrected. And until I know the whole truth, she's not going anywhere. Henderson urged his horse forward. Jonas, be reasonable. She killed people. Set fire to an orphanage with children inside. Did she? Jonas challenged. Or did someone else set that fire and blame her for it? Convenient, isn't it? The one person who knew about the corruption at Hollow Creek suddenly becomes the scapegoat for murder. Webb's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. I know plenty, Jonas said. I know Mrs. Crowley was selling orphans. I know someone wanted those ledgers destroyed badly enough to commit murder. And I know you showed up here mighty quick, Detective Webb, almost like you knew exactly where to find the girl everyone thought was dead. The crowd shifted uneasily. Dawson looked troubled, but Henderson pushed on. Listen to him! He's been bewitched by the woman, probably sleeping in his bed while his poor wife's barely cold in the ground. Jonas's hand tightened on the rifle. Take that back, Henderson. Take it back, or so help me. Papa, no, Clara cried. And then Rosie did something that shocked everyone. She stepped forward, moving past Jonas to stand at the edge of the porch, fully visible to the crowd. The bruises on her face were still visible, the marks on her throat clear even from a distance. You want me? She called out, her voice carrying across the yard. Then come get me. But look at me first. Really look. Does this look like the work of justice? Or does it look like someone tried to silence me? The crowd murmured. Some of the men looked uncomfortable. Who beat you? Someone called. I don't know, Rosie said honestly. I can't remember their faces, but I remember the questions they asked. They wanted to know where I hid the ledgers. The ones that proved Mrs. Crowley was selling children to the highest bidder, children whose parents were dead, children who had no one to protect them, children who disappeared and no one asked questions. Lies, Henderson shouted. Then let me prove it, Rosie said. Let me show you the ledgers. I hid them before the fire, somewhere safe where even I couldn't find them easily. Let me take you there. Let everyone see the truth. Webb's horse danced nervously. The ledgers burned in the fire. Did they? Rosie smiled grimly. Then you have nothing to worry about. But if I can produce them, if I can show everyone what was really happening at Hollow Creek, then maybe we can talk about who the real criminals are. Jonas stared at her. She'd never mentioned hiding the ledgers, had never said she knew where they were. Was it true? Or was she bluffing, buying time? Where? Webb demanded. Not until I have protection, Rosie said. Not until Sheriff Dawson, and only Sheriff Dawson, agrees to come with us. And not until Jonas can be there to make sure I don't have an unfortunate accident along the way. Dawson urged his horse forward. If you're lying, girl, then I'll hang, Rosie said simply. But if I'm telling the truth, then someone else swings. Someone who killed 2 people and tried to kill me. Someone who's been selling children for profit. Someone who's probably in this crowd right now hoping you'll shoot me before I can talk. The silence was profound. Jonas could see Webb's hand moving toward his gun, could see the calculation in his eyes. Don't, Jonas said quietly, raising his rifle. Don't even think about it. This is insane, Henderson blustered. She's playing you all for fools. Maybe, Dawson said slowly. Or maybe she's telling the truth. Either way, we do this proper. Girl comes into town under my protection. Tomorrow morning, she shows us where these ledgers are. If she's lying, she hangs. If she's telling the truth, he looked hard at Webb. Then we got bigger problems than one scared girl. Webb's face was stone. Fine, but she comes now, tonight. Can't risk her running. She stays here, Jonas said, under my guard. You have my word she'll be in town come morning. Your word isn't good enough. Then we got ourselves a standoff, Jonas said, because I'm not letting a mob take her. You want her in custody, proper custody, then Dawson can stay here tonight. But the rest of you, especially you, Webb, you clear off my property. Now. The crowd shifted again, uncertain. They'd come ready for a fight, but faced with the bruises on Rosie's face, with her calm words and Jonas's unwavering stance, their bloodlust was cooling. Finally, Webb spoke through gritted teeth. Tomorrow morning, sunrise. If those ledgers don't exist, McCord, you'll hang beside her for harboring a fugitive. I'll take that risk, Jonas said. Slowly, reluctantly, the mob dispersed. Henderson argued, threatened, but Dawson ordered him back, and eventually they all rode away, all except the sheriff, who dismounted and walked toward the house with his hands visible and empty. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen, Dawson said quietly. Please tell me you know what you're doing." "Not even a little," Jonas admitted. "But I know she's telling the truth. I feel it in my bones." "Hope your bones are right," Dawson said, "because come morning, all our lives might depend on it." That night passed slower than any Jonas had known. Dawson made himself comfortable on the porch with a bedroll and his own rifle, a silent sentinel between the house and whatever darkness might come creeping back. Inside, Clara finally fell asleep after making Rosie promise 3 times that she wouldn't leave, that she'd be there when the sun came up, that everything would be all right, even though none of them knew if that was true. Jonas found Rosie standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. "You never told me you knew where the ledgers were," he said quietly. "I didn't know," Rosie admitted, not turning around. "Not until I saw Webb's face. Then it came back, clear as day. The night of the fire, before everything went to hell, I took those books and I ran. Not far, couldn't get far with children screaming and smoke everywhere. There was a place, a hiding spot I'd found weeks earlier when I was—" She paused, her brow furrowing. "When I was watching, spying, trying to gather proof." "Proof of what?" "That's the part I still can't remember clearly. It's like watching a play through thick curtains. I can see shapes moving, hear voices, but I can't make out the details." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight her face looked older than her years, etched with a weariness that went soul deep. "Jonas, what if I'm wrong? What if the ledgers aren't there anymore? What if someone found them, destroyed them?" "Then we deal with that when it comes," Jonas said. "But I saw Webb's face too. He knows you're telling the truth. He's scared of what you might reveal." "Which means he's involved," Rosie said. "Which means tomorrow, when we go looking for those books, we'll be walking into a trap." "I know." "You could still back out. Take Clara and—" "Stop," Jonas said firmly, crossing the room to stand before her. "Stop trying to push us away. Stop trying to shoulder this alone. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's not negotiable." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you or Clara or any of this kindness. I'm nobody. I can't even remember who I was before—" "You're somebody to Clara," Jonas interrupted. "You're somebody to me. And whoever you were before doesn't matter as much as who you're choosing to be now. You could have run, could have disappeared into the night and saved yourself, but you stood on that porch and faced down a mob to protect us. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." She was crying openly now, silent tears tracking down her bruised cheeks. Without thinking, Jonas reached up and brushed them away with his thumb, his hand lingering against her face. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for, something that felt like the edge of a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Jonas," she whispered. "I know," he said, dropping his hand but not stepping back. "I know it's too soon. I know it's probably wrong. But I need you to know. If we don't make it through tomorrow, I need you to know that having you here, watching you with Clara, seeing you fight to remember, to survive, to be brave when you have every reason to give up, it's woken something in me I thought died with Martha. And I'm not sorry for it." "You should be," Rosie said, but her hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "You should be because I'm going to bring nothing but trouble to your life." "Too late," Jonas said with a ghost of a smile. "Trouble already came. Might as well see it through." They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the rest of the world falling away. Then Rosie pulled back gently, her smile sad but genuine. "You should get some sleep," she said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "What about you?" "I'll sleep when this is over," she said. "When I know Clara's safe. When I know you're safe. Until then, I'll keep watch with my ghost." Jonas wanted to argue, wanted to insist she rest, but he understood the need to stay vigilant, to prepare for battle. So he just nodded and headed toward the spare room, pausing at the doorway. "Rosie, those ledgers, they're at the orphanage, aren't they? That's where we're going tomorrow." She nodded slowly. "Under the sycamore tree in the courtyard. There's a loose stone in the ground, third from the left of the trunk. I buried them there in a metal box before the fire started. If they're still there, if no one found them, they'll prove everything. And if Webb tries to stop us from reaching them, then we'll know for certain he's not just a detective," Rosie said. We'll know he's a conspirator, maybe even a murderer. Jonas absorbed this, his jaw tightening. Tomorrow, you stay close to me. Whatever happens, you don't leave my side. Understood? Understood, she agreed. Jonas, thank you for believing me when you had no reason to. I had a reason, Jonas said. I saw what they did to you. I saw the fear in your eyes. And I saw the way Clara looked at you and knew, really knew, that you were meant to be here. Sometimes you have to trust things you can't explain. After he left, Rosie returned to the window, watching the night sky. Somewhere out there, the ruins of Hollow Creek waited, along with answers that might save her or damn her. Somewhere out there, people who wanted her dead were making plans. And somewhere in the darkness of her fractured memory, the truth was hiding, waiting to be dragged into the light. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promised rain. Clara woke early, sensing the tension in the house, and clung to Rosie with a desperation that broke hearts. You're coming back, Clara said, not a question, but a command. You promised. I'll do everything I can, Rosie said, kneeling to look the little girl in the eyes. But Clara, if something happens, if I don't come back, I need you to remember something. Your papa loves you more than anything in this world. He'll take care of you. He'll keep you safe. And Her voice caught. I'm so grateful I got to know you, even for just a little while. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. A family, Clara said simply. Yes, Rosie whispered, pulling the child into a fierce hug. A family. Jonas watched from the doorway, his heart in his throat. He'd asked Mrs. Johnson to come stay with Clara while they were gone, and the older woman arrived just as the sun began to break through the clouds, her face grim, but her resolve steady. You bring that girl back safe, Mrs. Johnson said to Jonas. Whatever the truth is, she deserves a fair hearing, not a mob, not a hanging, justice. That's what I'm aiming for, Jonas said, checking his rifle one last time. Dawson was already mounted, his face showing the sleepless night he'd endured. From down the road, Jonas could see other riders approaching, Webb at the head, flanked by 6 men who looked more like hired guns than lawmen. Henderson was there too, his face red with excitement and righteousness. The townsfolk who'd come the day before were notably absent, their bloodlust apparently cooled by the light of day. Ready? Dawson asked as Jonas helped Rosie onto Samson before mounting behind her. As we'll ever be, Jonas replied. The ride to Hollow Creek took 2 hours, following a rutted road that wound through hills covered in sage and scrub pine. No one spoke much. Webb kept glancing back at Rosie with an expression Jonas couldn't quite read. Calculation mixed with something that might have been fear or might have been anticipation. Henderson muttered prayers under his breath, convinced he was riding toward God's justice. Dawson just looked tired, like a man who'd seen too much darkness and wasn't sure he wanted to see any more. Rosie sat stiff in front of Jonas, her back not quite touching his chest, her hands gripping the saddle horn so tight her knuckles were white. Every few minutes, a tremor would run through her body, and Jonas would quietly ask if she was all right. She never answered, just nodded once and kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. When Hollow Creek finally came into view, Jonas understood why Rosie had gone silent. The orphanage was a monument to misery. 3 stories of gray stone, windows like dead eyes, surrounded by a high wall that made it look more like a prison than a home for children. One wing was blackened and partially collapsed, victim of the fire that had started everything. The grounds were overgrown, abandoned since the tragedy, and an air of desolation hung over the place like a shroud. Jesus, Dawson muttered. This is where they kept children? Welcome to Hollow Creek, Rosie said, her voice distant, where hope came to die. They dismounted at the gate, which hung open on broken hinges. Webb's men fanned out, hands on their weapons, and Jonas felt the trap closing around them. But there was no turning back now. The courtyard, Rosie said, her voice stronger now. The sycamore tree. That's where we need to go. They walked through the gate and across grounds that showed signs of hasty abandonment. Children's toys lay scattered and broken. Laundry still hung on lines, now tattered by weather and time, and everywhere the smell of old smoke and older sins. The courtyard was in the center of the complex, surrounded by the building on three sides. A single ancient sycamore tree stood in the middle, its branches bare and reaching toward the gray sky like accusing fingers. At its base, the ground was covered in fallen leaves and debris. Rosie walked toward it like she was approaching an altar or a gallows, her steps measured and deliberate. Jonas stayed close, his hand near his rifle. Dawson flanked her other side. Webb and his men formed a loose circle around them, cutting off any escape. "Third stone from the left," Rosie said, more to herself than anyone else. She knelt at the base of the tree, her hands pushing aside leaves and dirt. "It should be here." Her fingers found the edge of a stone, slightly raised from the others. She pried at it, her nails breaking, until Jonas knelt beside her and used his knife to lever it up. Beneath was a hollow space, and nestled in it was a metal box, rusted but intact. The silence was profound. "Open it," Webb said, and there was something in his voice that made Jonas's skin crawl. Not curiosity, not the voice of a man seeking truth, the voice of a man watching his carefully laid plans unravel. Rosie lifted the box with shaking hands. The lid was stuck, sealed by rust and time, but Jonas forced it open with his knife. Inside were 3 leather-bound ledgers, their pages yellowed but readable, and a smaller book that looked like a diary. Rosie opened the first ledger, her eyes scanning the pages. "Names," she whispered. "Children's names. Dates they arrived, dates they left, and amounts. Money paid for each one." She looked up at Dawson, her face pale. "They sold 47 children in 3 years. Some for labor, some for—" She swallowed hard. "Worse purposes. And here," she pointed to a column of initials. "These are the buyers, or at least their codes." Dawson took the ledger, his expression growing darker with each page he turned. "This is enough to hang a dozen people," he said quietly. "This is conspiracy. Human trafficking, child slavery." He looked at Webb. "Did you know about this?" "Of course not," Webb said smoothly. "That's why I was investigating. That's why this girl became a suspect when—" "Liar," Rosie said, opening the diary. Her hands were steadier now, her voice clearer. "This is my diary. I remember now. I remember everything." She began to read aloud. "May 14th, 1892. Detective Marcus Webb arrived today. He spent an hour in Mrs. Crowley's office. When he left, she was smiling. I followed him to the edge of town. He met with a man in a black carriage. They talked for 20 minutes. The man gave Webb an envelope. When I snuck back to check the ledgers later, 3 children's names had been added to the list. Thomas Reed, age 6. Emily Hartman, age 7. Sarah Black, age 4. Webb's face had gone pale. "That's a fabrication. She wrote that after—" "May 28th, Rosie continued, her voice growing stronger. "Webb came back, this time with others. I recognized one from the general store in town, Thomas Henderson. They inspected the children like they were livestock. Henderson specifically asked about the young boys. Said he needed workers who wouldn't ask questions. Mrs. Crowley negotiated prices while I hid in the pantry and wrote everything down." Henderson's face went from red to white to red again. "She's lying. I'm a respectable businessman." "June 3rd, Rosie read, her eyes never leaving the page. "I confronted Daniel about what I'd seen. He said he'd noticed the same things. Children disappearing, records being altered, money changing hands. He wanted to go to the authorities, but I told him the authorities were involved. We decided to steal the ledgers, to gather enough proof that even the corrupted law couldn't ignore it. That night, we made our plan." "Where's Daniel now?" Jonas asked quietly. Rosie's face crumbled. "Dead. He died in the fire. He was supposed to get the children out while I got the ledgers, but someone—" She looked at Webb. "Someone locked the doors from the outside, locked them and set the fire. Daniel and Mrs. Crowley's assistant, a woman named Grace who'd helped us, they were trapped inside. I only survived because I'd already gotten out through a window. But they caught me. They caught me and they beat me, and they asked where the ledgers were. And when I wouldn't tell them, they decided it was easier to make me disappear entirely." "This is insane," Webb said, but his hand was moving toward his gun. "She's clearly delusional. The trauma has made her imagine. The problem with lies, Dawson said conversationally, his own gun now drawn and pointed at Webb, is that truth has a way of shining through. And this truth, he gestured to the ledgers, this is pretty damn bright. Now I suggest you put your hands where I can see them, detective, because you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, human trafficking, and being a general piece of horse shit. Webb's men shifted nervously, unsure where their loyalties lay now that their employer was revealed as a monster. Henderson tried to run, but Jonas was faster, tripping him and pinning him to the ground with a knee in his back. "You sold children," Jonas said, his voice shaking with rage. "You sold babies to slavers and predators. For what? Money?" "You don't understand," Henderson wheezed. "The economy. The town needed. We were just doing business." "Business," Jonas repeated, pressing harder. "You called selling children business." "McCord, enough," Dawson said. "I need him alive to stand trial. Let him up." Jonas wanted to press harder, wanted to make Henderson suffer the way those children must have suffered. But he forced himself to stand, to step back, to let justice take its course even though every fiber of his being screamed for immediate vengeance. Webb made his move then, drawing his gun with the speed of a professional. But he didn't aim at Dawson or Jonas. He aimed at Rosie. "Those ledgers die with you," he said coldly. "Should have made sure the first time." The gunshot echoed across the courtyard, but it wasn't Webb's gun that fired. Dawson had been faster, his bullet catching Webb in the shoulder and spinning him around. Webb's shot went wild, hitting the sycamore tree and sending bark flying. Before Webb could recover, Jonas had his rifle trained on him, and Dawson's deputies, who'd been hanging back until now, finally moved in to disarm and restrain the wounded detective and his men. "It's over," Dawson said, though his voice held no triumph. "It's finally over." Rosie sat on the ground beside the ledgers, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Jonas went to her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders and pulling her close. "You did it," he said quietly. "You remembered. You faced them. It's done." "Daniel's still dead," she whispered. "Grace is still dead. And 47 children are still out there somewhere, sold to God knows who, suffering God knows what." "But now we have names," Dawson said, approaching them. "Now we have proof. We can find those children, we can bring them home, and we can make sure everyone involved hangs for what they've done." He looked at Rosie with something like respect. "Miss Bellamy, on behalf of the law, the real law, I apologize for what you've endured, and I promise you, we'll set this right." "Can you bring back the dead?" Rosie asked bitterly. "No," Dawson admitted, "but we can give them justice. That's the best any of us can do." The ride back to town was somber. Webb and Henderson were bound and gagged, their men disarmed and subdued. The ledgers were carefully wrapped and placed in Dawson's saddlebag, evidence that would topple prominent citizens and maybe even reach into the territorial government. Jonas rode with Rosie again, but this time she leaned back against him, exhausted and shaking, finally allowing herself to be held. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you testify," Dawson said. "Now you tell your story to a judge and jury. Now those men pay for what they've done." "And after that?" Jonas felt her tense, waiting for his answer. He thought about Clara at home, probably wearing a hole in the floor with her pacing. He thought about the ranch, about the life he'd built there, about the lonely years since Martha died. He thought about the way Rosie had faced down a mob with nothing but the truth as her weapon, the way she'd fought to remember despite the pain it brought, the way Clara's face lit up whenever Rosie was near. "After that," he said carefully, "you'll need a place to recover, to heal, to figure out what comes next." He paused. "If you want, that place could be the ranch, could be with us. No obligations, no expectations, just a place to breathe for a while." He felt her tears soaking through his shirt. "I can't pay you. I don't have anything." "You have your life," Jonas said. "You have your courage. You have the truth you were willing to die for. That's more than most people have." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And Clara would never forgive me if I let you leave." "What about you?" Rosie asked. "Would you forgive you?" Jonas didn't answer, couldn't answer, because the truth was too new and too terrifying to speak aloud. That somewhere in the last week, this broken stranger had become someone he couldn't imagine losing. that her presence in his house had filled spaces he hadn't known were empty, that when he pictured the future, she was in it, and Clara was smiling, and the loneliness that had been his constant companion for 4 years was finally gone. They arrived in Red Willow to find half the town gathered in the street. News traveled fast, and someone had ridden ahead to spread word of what had been discovered. The mood was ugly, shame and anger mixing into something dangerous. Some shouted accusations at Henderson as he was dragged from his horse. Some wept, thinking of the children who'd been sold under their noses. And some looked at Rosie with expressions that ranged from pity to admiration to suspicion not quite erased. Mrs. Johnson was there, Clara held tight in her arms. The moment Clara saw Rosie, she squirmed free and ran, her little legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. "Mama, Mama, you came back!" Rosie slid from the horse and caught Clara as the child launched herself into her arms. They went down in a tangle of limbs and tears, Clara's small body shaking with sobs of relief, Rosie holding her like she'd never let go. "I told you," Clara said through her tears. "I told you mamas don't leave." "I'm not your—" Rosie started, but Clara put a small hand over her mouth. "Yes, you are," Clara said with absolute certainty. "The wind said so, and the wind doesn't lie." Jonas stood over them, his own eyes burning with tears he refused to shed in front of the whole town. Mrs. Johnson approached, her face stern but her eyes kind. "Whole town's talking about what happened out there," she said. "About what you found. About what that girl survived." She looked at Rosie. "About what she's done. You brought down some powerful people today, child. Made some dangerous enemies." "I just told the truth," Rosie said, still holding Clara. "Sometimes the truth is the most dangerous thing there is," Mrs. Johnson said. "But it's also the most powerful. You're going to have to testify. Going to have to stand up in court and tell the whole territory what happened. You ready for that?" "No," Rosie admitted, "but I'll do it anyway. For Daniel, for Grace, for all those children." "Good girl," Mrs. Johnson said. Then surprisingly, she reached down and helped Rosie to her feet, pulling her into a brief but fierce hug. "You've got more spine than most men in this town. You'll do just fine." Dawson approached, clearing his throat. "Miss Bellamy, I need you to come to the office, give a formal statement. We'll need every detail you can remember for the trial." "Can it wait until morning?" Jonas asked. "She's been through enough for one day." Dawson looked at Rosie's exhausted face, at the way she swayed on her feet, and nodded. "Tomorrow morning, first light. But Miss Bellamy—" He fixed her with a serious look. "There are going to be more people like Webb. People who want to keep this quiet, who want to make sure you never testify. Until this goes to trial and those men hang, you're not safe. You understand that?" "I understand," Rosie said quietly. "I'll keep her safe," Jonas said. "Anyone comes looking for her, they'll have to come through me first." That's what I'm afraid of," Dawson muttered. But he nodded and turned to deal with his prisoners, leaving Jonas to guide Rosie and Clara back toward his horse. They rode home in silence as the sun finally broke through the clouds, turning the world gold and green. Clara sat in front, chattering about everything Mrs. Johnson had made for lunch and how the mean hen had laid 3 eggs. Rosie sat behind Jonas this time, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his back. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and strong, and he thought about how close he'd come to losing her before he'd even really found her. At the ranch, Clara ran ahead to tell the chickens about the adventure, while Jonas helped Rosie down from the horse. She stumbled, her legs weak from exhaustion and stress, and he caught her, and for a moment they stood there, his hands on her waist, her hands on his shoulders, something unspoken passing between them. "Jonas," she said softly, "I remember something else, something I didn't say at Hollow Creek." "What's that?" "Why I was there. Why I was working at the orphanage." Her eyes were bright with tears. "I was one of them, one of the children who was sold. When I was 8, my parents died and I was sent to an orphanage in Missouri, a place just like Hollow Creek, and I was sold to a family who wanted a servant, not a daughter. I spent 10 years working for them, sleeping in their barn, eating their scraps. And when I finally ran away, when I finally escaped, I swore I'd never let it happen to another child if I could help it. That's why I went to work at Hollow Creek. That's why I was watching. That's why I couldn't let them get away with it. Jonas's arms tightened around her. You're the bravest person I've ever known, he said. I'm not brave, she said. I'm terrified. I'm terrified of what comes next. I'm terrified of testifying. I'm terrified that Webb's people will find me. I'm terrified that I'll bring danger to you and Clara, and I'm terrified, her voice dropped to a whisper, I'm terrified of how much I want to stay here, how much I want this to be real. It is real, Jonas said. You're real. This is real. And whatever comes next, we face it together. That's a promise. She looked up at him, and he saw in her eyes the same longing he felt in his own chest. He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. She rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and desperate all at once, a promise and a plea, an ending and a beginning. When they finally broke apart, Clara was standing in the doorway of the house, grinning like she'd just discovered the secret to eternal happiness. I knew it, she announced. I knew Mama was supposed to stay. The wind told me, and I was right. Clara, Rosie started, but the little girl was already running toward them, wrapping her arms around both their legs. You love Papa, and Papa loves you, and I love both of you, and we're going to be a family forever and ever, Clara declared. That's what the wind says, and the wind is always right. Jonas looked at Rosie over Clara's head. The wind might be onto something, he said. It might be, Rosie agreed, and for the first time since he'd found her in that burlap sack, she smiled, really smiled, and Jonas thought maybe, just maybe, they'd all survive this after all. That night, with Clara asleep and the doors barred, Jonas and Rosie sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the darkness, enemies were making plans. Somewhere, justice was slowly grinding forward. And somewhere, 47 children were waiting to be found and brought home. But here, on this porch, under these stars, two broken people had found something neither of them expected. Not just safety or shelter, but hope. The kind of hope that survives darkness and grows stronger for having endured it. The kind of hope that whispers maybe, just maybe, the worst is over and the best is yet to come. Tomorrow's going to be hard, Rosie said quietly. Most things worth doing are, Jonas replied, but you'll be there. Every step of the way. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. I don't know what I did to deserve you, or Clara, or this. Maybe you don't have to deserve it, Jonas said. Maybe grace isn't something you earn. Maybe it's just something that happens when you're brave enough to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Is that what you believe? It's what I'm learning, Jonas said. From you. They sat in comfortable silence until the night grew cold and sleep called them inside. Tomorrow would bring challenges neither of them could predict. But tonight they had each other. They had Clara and they had hope. And sometimes that was enough. Morning came too soon and brought with it a cold rain that turned the road to Red Willow into a river of mud. Jonas stood at the window watching the gray dawn break while Rosie dressed in the bedroom, preparing herself for what lay ahead. Clara was still asleep, curled up in her bed with her stuffed horse clutched tight, blissfully unaware that today might change everything. The sound of horses approaching made Jonas's hand move instinctively to his rifle. But it was only Dawson, accompanied by two deputies Jonas recognized. Good men, honest men, the kind you wanted at your back when the world turned ugly. Time to go, Dawson called from the yard, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Rosie emerged from the bedroom wearing one of Martha's old dresses that Mrs. Johnson had altered to fit her smaller frame. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow-green shadows, but the marks on her throat were still visible, a reminder of how close she'd come to death. She'd pinned her dark hair back severely, making her look older, more serious, ready for battle. You don't have to do this, Jonas said quietly, though he knew she did. Yes, I do, Rosie replied. For Daniel, for Grace, for every child they sold. She looked toward Clara's room, her expression softening. For her. So she grows up in a world where people can't get away with this. Mrs. Johnson arrived just as they were mounting up, ready to spend the day with Clara. The older woman pulled Rosie aside, pressing something into her hand. My mother's cross, Mrs. Johnson said. You're going to face devils today, child. Take this with you. Remind them that God sees everything, even when the law looks away. Rosie's fingers closed around the small silver cross, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Johnson said grimly. Thank me when this is over, and you're still standing. The ride to town was miserable, rain soaking through their coats and turning the world into shades of gray and brown. Jonas rode close to Rosie, watching for any sign of trouble, but the road remained empty except for the mud and the rain and the weight of what was coming. Red Willow looked different in the daylight after yesterday's revelations. The people who'd been ready to hang Rosie as a murderer now averted their eyes as they passed, shame making them small and quiet. Some whispered behind their hands. Some stared openly, trying to reconcile the bruised young woman with the hero who'd brought down their most respected citizens. A few nodded with something like respect, though whether it was for her courage or their own guilty consciences, Jonas couldn't tell. The sheriff's office was crowded when they arrived. Dawson had called in the territorial marshal, a hard-faced man named Clayton who'd seen his share of corruption and wasn't impressed by much. Also present was Judge Arthur Blackwood, who'd ridden in from Cheyenne overnight specifically for this case. The judge was old, maybe 70, with white hair and eyes that missed nothing. Miss Bellamy, Judge Blackwood said as Rosie entered, his voice formal but not unkind. I've read Sheriff Dawson's initial report and examined the ledgers you recovered. Before we proceed to a formal hearing, I need to hear your testimony in full. Everything you remember from the beginning. Rosie glanced at Jonas, who nodded encouragement, then took the chair indicated across from the judge's temporary desk. For the next 3 hours, she talked. She told them about growing up in the Missouri orphanage, about being sold at age 8 to the family who'd treated her like livestock. She told them about escaping at 18, about making her way west, about hearing that Hollow Creek needed staff, and thinking maybe, just maybe, she could help children the way no one had helped her. She told them about noticing the discrepancies in the records within her first month. Children who were listed as adopted but whose paperwork didn't look quite right. Children who left in the middle of the night without goodbyes. Money that appeared in Mrs. Crowley's office that didn't match the orphanage's legitimate income. I started keeping my own records, Rosie said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Writing down everything I saw, everyone who visited, every transaction I could observe. Daniel, the young man who died in the fire, he noticed the same things. We compared notes, built a case, but we didn't know who to trust. The local sheriff had been to the orphanage several times, always leaving with Mrs. Crowley smiling. And then Detective Webb arrived. Tell me about Webb, Marshal Clayton interjected, his first words since the testimony began. Rosie's face hardened. He came ostensibly to investigate complaints about conditions at the orphanage. But I saw him meet with Mrs. Crowley privately, saw money change hands, and after his visits, the sales would increase. Children who'd been there for years suddenly had adoptions arranged. I followed Webb once, saw him meet with men in expensive suits, men who didn't look like they wanted children out of charity. Can you identify these men? The judge asked. Some, Rosie said. Thomas Henderson from the general store. He's already in custody. There was a rancher from the south named Calhoun who bought 3 boys over 6 months, said he needed ranch hands, but the boys were only 8 and 9 years old. And there was a woman, Rosie's voice faltered. A woman in fine clothes who came looking for girls specifically. Young girls. She bought 4 over the time I was there. Mrs. Crowley called her Lady Margaret, but I don't know her real name. The way she looked at those children, Rosie wrapped her arms around herself. I knew what she wanted them for. I knew, and I couldn't stop it. You stopped it by gathering evidence, Judge Blackwood said firmly, by risking your life to expose them. That takes courage most men don't have, let alone a young woman alone in the world. It wasn't courage, Rosie said bitterly. It was guilt. Every child they sold while I gathered proof, that's on me. Every day I waited to have enough evidence to be sure. Another child suffered. That's not on you, Jonas said from where he stood by the door. That's on them. On the monsters who sold innocence for profit. Marshal Clayton consulted his notes. According to the ledgers, 47 children were sold over 3 years. We've identified the buyers for 32 of them. My men are already tracking them down. Some of the children have been recovered, 3 so far, including a boy who was being worked nearly to death on Calhoun's ranch. The others, he paused, his face grim. We'll find them, however long it takes.
What about the children who died in the fire? Rosie asked, her voice breaking. Daniel and Grace,
They were trying to save the little ones, but someone locked the doors from outside. Someone trapped them in there deliberately. Webb has confessed to that, Dawson said quietly. Once he realized how much evidence we had, once his shoulder wound got infected and he thought he might die anyway, he started talking. Said it was Mrs. Crowley's idea. She knew you and Daniel were on to them, knew you'd been snooping. She told Webb to set the fire, make it look like an accident, eliminate the evidence and the witnesses all at once. Webb brought 2 of his men to do it. They doused the building in kerosene, lit it up, and barred the doors. They didn't know you'd already escaped with the ledgers. Did he say what happened after? Jonas asked. How they found her? Webb's confession painted a brutal picture. They'd searched the grounds and found Rosie hiding in the woods, the metal box clutched in her arms. They'd beaten her, trying to make her tell where she'd hidden the ledgers, not believing her when she said they were buried back at the orphanage. When she wouldn't, or couldn't, give them what they wanted, Webb had ordered his men to kill her and dispose of the body where it would never be found. But one of the men balked, Dawson continued. Said he'd signed up for money, not murder. Webb shot him, then stuffed you in that burlap sack himself. His men panicked, threw you in a wagon, and drove out to McCord's land figuring it was remote enough that you'd never be found. They didn't know Jonas rides his fence line every morning. Didn't know Clara would be with him. Rosie was shaking now, the memories flooding back with brutal clarity. I remember the wagon. I remember praying someone would find me before I suffocated. I remember thinking about all those children and how I'd failed them. You didn't fail anyone, Judge Blackwood said firmly. Because of you, we have evidence that will dismantle a trafficking network that reaches across 3 territories. Because of you, children will be returned to safety. And because of you, the people responsible will hang. He stood, gathering his papers. Miss Bellamy, I'm ordering you into protective custody until the trial. We have reason to believe others involved in this conspiracy may attempt to silence you before you can testify publicly. She'll stay at my ranch, Jonas said immediately, under my protection. Mr. McCord, I appreciate your dedication, but nothing, Jonas interrupted. You put her in a jail cell, even for her own protection, and you'll break her. She needs to be somewhere she feels safe, somewhere she can breathe. That's my ranch. He's right, Rosie said quietly. I can't be locked up again. Even if it's for my own good, I'll lose my mind. Judge Blackwood studied them both, his old eyes seeing more than they said. Very well, but I'm assigning 2 deputies to guard the property around the clock. And Mr. McCord, if anything happens to this witness, if she disappears or is harmed in any way, you'll answer for it. Understood, Jonas said. The formal hearing took most of the afternoon. They brought in Webb, his shoulder bandaged and his face pale with infection and fear. He corroborated Rosie's testimony, adding details that made even the hardened lawmen look sick. Mrs. Crowley's network had been operating for nearly a decade, selling hundreds of children across the Western Territories. Some had been worked to death. Some had disappeared entirely. And some, a handful that made the judge order the courtroom cleared of everyone but essential personnel, had been sold to people whose depravity exceeded even slavery. Henderson broke down on the stand, weeping and begging for mercy he hadn't shown the children he'd purchased. He claimed he'd only bought them for labor, had treated them well, but when marshals searched his property, they found 3 children living in his barn, underfed and covered in bruises. Henderson had no defense left after that. By the time they finished, the sun was setting and Rosie looked like she might collapse. Jonas helped her outside where a crowd had gathered, larger than before, angrier. But this time the anger wasn't directed at Rosie. It was directed at Henderson and Webb and everyone who'd known or suspected and done nothing. "Hang them!" someone shouted. "Hang them all!" another voice echoed. Judge Blackwood appeared on the steps, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Justice will be served, but it will be served according to law, not mob rule. These men will stand trial. They will be convicted by a jury of their peers, and they will hang from a proper gallows, not a lynch rope. We are not animals. We are civilized people, and we will act like it." The crowd muttered, but didn't advance. Dawson and his deputies formed a protective cordon around Rosie and Jonas, escorting them to their horses, while the two assigned guards, young men named Miller and Shaw, mounted up to follow them back to the ranch. Clara was waiting on the porch when they arrived, Mrs. Johnson beside her. The little girl took one look at Rosie's exhausted face and ran to her, wrapping her arms around Rosie's waist. "Mama looks tired," Clara said to Jonas. "Mama needs soup and bread and her bed." "That's exactly what Mama needs," Jonas agreed, his use of the word deliberate. Rosie's eyes met his, questioning, and he nodded. If Clara wanted to call her Mama, if it brought the child comfort and Rosie peace, then who was he to argue with what the wind had told his daughter? That night, with the deputies stationed outside and Clara finally asleep, Jonas found Rosie standing in the kitchen exactly as she had that first night, staring out the window, arms wrapped around herself, lost in thoughts too heavy for one person to carry. "It's not over," she said without turning around. "The judge says 3 more weeks until the trial. 3 more weeks of waiting for someone to come finish what Webb started." "They won't get to you," Jonas said. "I won't let them." "You can't promise that." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Jonas, these people, they have money, power, connections. What if they bribe the jury? What if they make evidence disappear? What if they kill me before I can testify?" "Then we run," Jonas said simply. "All 3 of us. We take Clara and we disappear into the mountains or down into Mexico. We start over somewhere they can't find us." "You'd do that?" Rosie asked, disbelief coloring her voice. "You'd give up your ranch, your life here, everything you've built?" Jonas crossed the room and took her hands in his. "This ranch is just land and wood. My life here is just days and nights. But you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You and Clara, you're something more, something that matters more than any of this. So yes, I'd give it all up if it meant keeping you both safe." "That's crazy," Rosie whispered, but she didn't pull away. "Maybe," Jonas agreed, "but I learned something these past weeks. I learned that sometimes crazy is just another word for brave. And I learned that when the wind brings you someone who makes your daughter smile and your house feel like a home again, you don't question it. You just hold on tight and face whatever comes." "The wind didn't bring me," Rosie said. "Random chance brought me. Someone's cruelty brought me." "Clara would disagree," Jonas said. "And lately, I'm thinking maybe Clara knows things we don't. Maybe there's no such thing as random chance. Maybe every broken road leads somewhere if you're brave enough to follow it." Rosie laughed, the sound wet with tears. "When did you become a philosopher?" "About the time a woman in a burlap sack became the most important person in my life besides my daughter," Jonas said. Then, before he could lose his courage, before doubt could creep back in, he pulled her close and kissed her properly. Not the desperate kiss of 2 people facing danger, but the deliberate kiss of someone making a choice, staking a claim, declaring an intention. When they broke apart, Rosie was crying in earnest now. "I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you." "Stop saying that," Jonas said firmly. "Stop acting like you have to earn love or safety or peace. You survived. You fought. You told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. If that doesn't make you deserving, then I don't know what does." "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm so scared of what comes next, of the trial, of testifying, of looking at those men and having to relive everything. I'm scared I'll freeze. I'm scared I'll fail." "Then I'll be there," Jonas said. "Right there in that courtroom. And every time you feel like you can't go on, you look at me and remember, you're not alone anymore. You've got me. You've got Clara. You've got a whole town of people who know the truth now. And you've got yourself. And that's the strongest thing of all." They held each other in the dim kitchen as the clock ticked toward midnight and the deputies made their rounds outside. Somewhere in the darkness, enemies were plotting. Somewhere, the machinery of justice was grinding forward. But here, in this moment, 2 people who'd been broken by life had found something neither expected. Not just love, though that was part of it, but belonging. The kind of bone-deep certainty that says this is home, this is right, this is worth fighting for. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Rosie spent her days helping around the ranch, slowly building strength and confidence. Clara appointed herself Rosie's constant shadow, chattering away about everything and nothing, teaching her the names of all the chickens and which wildflowers were good for making crowns. Jonas worked the land but never strayed far, always keeping Rosie within sight, always aware of the deputies standing watch. Twice, strangers appeared on the road, men with hard faces and obvious intentions. The deputies turned them away both times, but the message was clear. Someone didn't want Rosie to make it to trial. Someone was willing to pay good money to silence her permanently. Marshal Clayton visited twice, bringing news of recovered children and arrested conspirators. The network was larger than anyone had imagined, reaching into 4 territories and involving dozens of buyers and facilitators. Mrs. Crowley had disappeared, likely fled to Mexico or Canada, but her associates were being rounded up one by one. Each arrest meant another child found, another family reunited, or tragically, another confirmation of a child who hadn't survived their ordeal. "We found the Hartman girl," Clayton said on his second visit, his voice heavy. "Emily. She's alive, but—" He glanced at Clara playing in the yard and lowered his voice. "But damaged. Might never recover from what was done to her. The man who bought her is in custody. He'll hang, but it won't undo what he did." Rosie closed her eyes, grief etched on her face. She was 7 years old, just 7. She used to sing hymns while she did her chores. Her voice was so pure, so sweet. "She doesn't sing anymore," Clayton said quietly. "But she's alive because of you. Remember that. All of them are alive because you were brave enough to gather evidence and strong enough to survive." On the morning of the trial, Rosie woke before dawn, unable to sleep. Jonas found her in the barn, brushing Samson with methodical strokes, her face pale but determined. "Today's the day," she said unnecessarily. "Today's the day," Jonas confirmed. "You ready?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." Clara insisted on coming, despite Jonas's protests. "Mama needs me there," she said with the absolute certainty of a child who believes she understands the universe. The wind said so. So all 3 of them rode into Red Willow that morning, flanked by Miller and Shaw, and met at the edge of town by a full escort of territorial marshals. The courthouse was packed, people standing 3 deep in the hallways, everyone wanting to witness justice, or vengeance, depending on their perspective. Judge Blackwood presided with stern dignity, brooking no nonsense from the crowd or the defense attorneys who'd been brought in to represent Webb, Henderson, and the other conspirators currently in custody. Rosie took the stand mid-morning, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger as she told her story to the packed courtroom. She told them everything: the sales, the abuse, the children who'd disappeared, the ledgers that documented it all, the fire that killed Daniel and Grace, the beating that nearly killed her, and she named names, not just the men in custody, but others she'd seen, others who'd participated, others who needed to answer for their crimes. The defense attorney, a smooth-talking man from Cheyenne, tried to break her testimony. "Isn't it true, Miss Bellamy, that you were fired from the orphanage for stealing?" "I was never fired," Rosie said calmly. "I was nearly murdered to keep me from exposing the truth." "Isn't it true that you have a history of mental instability, that you claim not to remember large portions of your past?" "I suffered a severe head injury when I was beaten," Rosie said, her voice hard. "Amnesia is a documented medical condition, as Dr. Morrison has already testified. What I do remember, every word I've spoken today, is the absolute truth." "But you admit you worked at an orphanage in Missouri as a child, not as staff. Who's to say you didn't confuse your own childhood trauma with what you claim to have witnessed at Hollow Creek?" Jonas saw Rosie's hands grip the witness box, saw the tremor that ran through her body. He willed her to stay strong, to not let this bastard twist her words. "I know the difference," Rosie said quietly, "between being sold at age 8 by people who were supposed to protect me and watching other children suffer the same fate when I was old enough to stop it. I know the difference between my scars and their bruises. I know the difference between my nightmares and their screams. And I know," her voice rose, filling the courtroom, "I know that you're trying to confuse the jury because the truth is damning and undeniable. Those ledgers exist. Those children exist, and those men, she pointed at Webb and Henderson. They profited from suffering, and they deserve to hang. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood's gavel came down like thunder, calling for order. But the damage, or the victory, depending on perspective, was done. Rosie had faced her accusers and refused to be broken. The trial lasted 3 more days. Witness after witness testified. Recovered children, their new caretakers, the marshals who'd found them, the doctors who'd documented their injuries. The ledgers were entered into evidence, their damning columns of names and prices impossible to dispute. And finally, Webb himself took the stand, his infected shoulder making him weak and desperate enough to bargain for his life. He confessed to everything: the bribes, the fires, the attempted murder. And he named others, powerful men in Cheyenne and beyond, men who'd thought themselves untouchable. By the time he finished, half the territorial government was implicated and 3 more arrest warrants had been issued. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict in a voice that shook with emotion. We find the defendants guilty on all counts: murder, arson, human trafficking, conspiracy. And we recommend the maximum penalty permitted by law. Judge Blackwood nodded gravely. Marcus Webb, Thomas Henderson, and your co-conspirators, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of crimes so heinous they defy civilized comprehension. You sold children, innocent, helpless children, to slavers and predators. You murdered 2 people to cover your crimes, and you attempted to murder the one witness brave enough to expose you. For these crimes I sentence you to death by hanging, said sentence to be carried out 1 week hence. May God have mercy on your souls, because this court has none. The courtroom erupted again, but this time with cheers and applause. Jonas pulled Rosie close as she collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs of relief and exhaustion and grief for all the children who couldn't be saved. Clara wrapped herself around Rosie's legs, and together the 3 of them stood there in the chaos, holding each other while justice, imperfect and incomplete but real nonetheless, was finally served. Outside the courthouse, the crowd parted for them like a sea. People reached out to touch Rosie's hand, to thank her, to tell her she was brave. Mrs. Johnson pushed through the crowd and pulled Rosie into a fierce hug. "You did it, child," she said. "You stood up to monsters and you won." "It doesn't feel like winning," Rosie said quietly. "Not when Emily Hartman doesn't sing anymore. Not when Daniel and Grace are still dead." "No," Mrs. Johnson agreed. "But it's justice. And sometimes that's the best we can do in this broken world." Marshal Clayton approached, his face grim but satisfied. "Miss Bellamy, thanks to your testimony, we've issued warrants for 17 more individuals across 4 territories. This network is finished. And those children, the ones we've found and the ones we're still looking for, they have a chance now. A chance at real lives because you refuse to stay silent." "What happens to them?" Rosie asked. "The children you've recovered. Where do they go?" "Some have living relatives we're trying to locate," Clayton said. "The others—" He paused. "There's talk of establishing proper orphanages, well-funded, well-regulated places where children are protected, not exploited. Some folks are saying we should name one after you." "No," Rosie said immediately. "Name it after Daniel. He died trying to save them. He deserves to be remembered." "The Daniel Morrison Home for Children," Clayton said, trying it out, "has a nice ring to it. I'll pass that along." As the sun set on Red Willow that evening, Jonas drove Rosie and Clara home in the wagon, the deputies following at a respectful distance. The trial was over. The verdict was just. In 1 week, the men who'd caused so much suffering would hang, and the world would be marginally better for their absence. But for now, there was just the road home, and Clara's sleepy chatter, and Rosie's hand in Jonas's, and the knowledge that they'd survived. They'd faced the darkness and come through it together, scarred but unbroken, changed but not destroyed. "Papa," Clara said drowsily from where she sat between them, "now that the bad men are going away, does that mean Mama can stay forever?" Jonas looked at Rosie, the question hanging between them. They'd never discussed the future, never talked about what came after the trial. There'd been too much uncertainty, too much danger. But now— "That depends on your mama," Jonas said carefully. "She's free to go anywhere she wants now, free to start a new life wherever she chooses.
Rosie was quiet for a long moment, staring at the road ahead. Then she squeezed Jonas's hand and said, "I already have a new life. Right here. If you'll have me." "Mama's staying," Claire announced to the darkening sky. "I told you the wind was right." And maybe it was. Maybe Clara's wind really did know things they didn't.
Or maybe sometimes broken people find each other at exactly the right moment and call it fate when it's really just grace, unearned, unexpected, and infinitely precious. Either way, as they rode toward home beneath a sky full of stars, Jonas McCord allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst really was over and the best was yet to come. The week between the verdict and the hanging passed in a strange twilight of normalcy and anticipation. Life on the ranch continued its rhythms, chickens fed, horses tended, fences mended, but underneath it all ran a current of waiting, of knowing something final was coming, and not quite knowing what would follow after. Rosie threw herself into work with an intensity that worried Jonas. She was up before dawn scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that barely needed it, baking enough bread to feed an army. At night she'd collapse into exhausted sleep, but Jonas could hear her through the thin walls, crying softly in the darkness, processing everything she'd endured and witnessed and survived. On the third morning, he found her in the garden Martha had planted years ago, now overgrown and wild. Rosie was on her knees pulling weeds with savage efficiency, her hands already dirty and scratched. "You're going to work yourself to death," Jonas said gently, crouching beside her. "I need to be useful," Rosie said without stopping. "Need to prove I'm not just—" She paused, struggling for words. "I'm not just a victim, not just someone who needs saving. I need to be someone who contributes, who earns her place here." "You don't have to earn anything," Jonas said, catching her hands and stilling them. "You've already given us more than you know." "What have I given you besides trouble and danger?" Rosie asked, finally meeting his eyes. "Your life was peaceful before I came along. Now you've got enemies, you've had marshals camped on your property, and your daughter is calling a stranger Mama." "My life was empty before you came along," Jonas corrected. "I was going through the motions, raising Clara the best I could, but there was no joy in it, no hope, just one day after another stretching into forever. You changed that. You brought life back into this house. You made Clara smile like I haven't seen since she was a baby. And you made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to do this, Jonas. I don't know how to be part of a family. I was 8 years old the last time someone loved me without expecting something in return. I don't even remember what that feels like." "Then we'll figure it out together," Jonas said. "Nobody's born knowing how to be a family. You just wake up each day and try your best and hope that's enough." "What if my best isn't enough? What if I fail Clara? What if I fail you?" Jonas pulled her close, heedless of the dirt on her hands and clothes. "The only way you could fail us is by leaving. Everything else we can work through." That afternoon, Clara found them still in the garden, now working side by side to clear the overgrown beds. The little girl plopped down between them, her face serious. "Mama," she said. The word came naturally now, no longer questioned or corrected. "Why are you sad?" Rosie wiped her eyes, trying to smile. "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just tired." "The wind says you're sad because you're remembering bad things," Clara said, with the unsettling perception children sometimes have. "But the wind also says the bad things are over now. The bad men are going away forever, and you get to stay here and be my real mama." "Is that what the wind says?" Rosie asked, her voice catching. Clara nodded solemnly. "And the wind doesn't lie. Papa says I made that up, but I didn't. The wind talks to people who listen. Mama used to listen too, my first mama, the one in heaven. Papa told me she could hear things other people couldn't. That's how I know you're supposed to be here. Because you can hear the wind too, can't you?" Rosie looked at Jonas over Clara's head, her expression questioning. He nodded slightly. It was true. Martha had been like that, claiming she could sense things in the air, in the way the grass bent, in the flight patterns of birds. He'd thought it fanciful until she'd predicted storms, sensed when the cattle were in danger, knew Jonas was coming home before his horse crested the hill. "Yes," Rosie said quietly. "Yes, I can hear it. It sounds like music almost, like a song without words." Clara beamed. "See, Papa? I told you.
Mama hears the wind, and the wind brought her to us, and now she's going to stay forever. If that's what she wants, Jonas said carefully, always leaving Rosie the choice, the freedom to decide her own fate. It's what I want, Rosie said, and this time her smile reached her eyes. It's what I want more than anything. The day of the hanging came cold and bright, winter's first serious warning in the air. Jonas had debated whether to go, whether to bring closure by witnessing the end of the men who'd nearly destroyed Rosie. In the end, Rosie made the decision for them. I need to see it, she said. I need to know they're really gone, that they can't hurt anyone ever again. Clara stayed home with Mrs. Johnson, though she'd wanted to come. This isn't for children, Jonas had said firmly, one of the few times he'd overruled her wishes. This is adult business, dark business. Red Willow had never seen such a crowd. People came from neighboring towns and distant ranches, all wanting to witness justice served. The gallows had been built in the town square, 3 nooses hanging in a neat row. Guards surrounded the platform, ensuring no one would interfere with the execution. No rescue attempts, no lynch mob trying to speed things along. Webb was brought out first, his face pale but composed. He'd made peace with his fate, or at least accepted its inevitability. He looked at the crowd without flinching, his eyes passing over Rosie without recognition or remorse. Henderson came next, still weeping and praying, begging God and man for forgiveness he hadn't earned and wouldn't receive. His face was blotchy and swollen, his legs barely holding him as the guards helped him up the steps. The third man was a buyer named Patterson, who'd been captured trying to flee to Canada. He'd purchased 11 children over 2 years, worked 3 of them to death, and sold the others when they became too old or injured to be useful. He walked to his noose with the blank expression of someone whose humanity had long since departed. Judge Blackwood read the sentences, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. For the crimes of murder, arson, conspiracy, and the trafficking of innocent children, you are hereby sentenced to death. May God have mercy on your souls. The hangman placed the nooses, adjusted them with professional efficiency. Jonas felt Rosie's hand grip his so tightly it hurt, felt her whole body trembling. He pulled her close, giving her something to hold on to as the moment approached. Last words? The hangman asked, more formality than genuine interest. Webb looked at Rosie then, really looked at her for the first time. You should have stayed in that sack, he said coldly. World would have been simpler. But not better, Rosie said, loud enough for him to hear. Never better. The hangman pulled the lever. The crowd gasped as one, then fell silent. It was over in seconds, quick and clinical and final. 3 men who'd caused immeasurable suffering now swung lifeless in the winter wind, their crimes paid for but never truly balanced against the damage they'd done. Rosie buried her face in Jonas's chest, her shoulders shaking. He held her as the crowd slowly dispersed, as the bodies were cut down and loaded onto a wagon, as Red Willow returned to something resembling normalcy. When she finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear. It's done, she whispered. It's really done. It is, Jonas confirmed. They can't hurt you or anyone else ever again. Then why don't I feel better? Rosie asked. Why does it still feel like something's missing? Because punishment isn't the same as healing, Jonas said quietly. That part takes longer. But we've got time now. All the time in the world. They rode home in silence, the weight of what they'd witnessed sitting heavy between them. When they arrived, Clara was waiting on the porch, her face anxious until she saw them. Then she ran down the steps and threw herself at Rosie with such force they both nearly fell. You came back, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. I was afraid you wouldn't come back. I'll always come back, Rosie promised, holding the little girl tight. Always. That's what mamas do. That night, after Clara was asleep and the house was quiet, Jonas found Rosie on the porch where so many of their important conversations had happened. She was wrapped in Martha's shawl, staring up at the stars. I've been thinking, she said as he settled beside her, about what comes next, about who I want to be now that I'm not running or hiding or fighting anymore. And who's that? Jonas asked. Someone useful, Rosie said. Marshall Clayton told me they're establishing proper orphanages, places where children will be safe and cared for. They'll need people to run them, people who understand what those children have been through, people who won't give up on them.
Jonas felt something cold settle in his stomach. You want to leave? Go work at one of these new orphanages. No, Rosie said quickly, turning to face him. No, I want to stay here. This is home. You and Clara, you're my family. But Jonas, there are so many children who need help. What if... She paused, gathering courage. What if we helped them? Not all of them, we couldn't possibly, but some. What if we opened our home to children who have nowhere else to go? What if we gave them what I never had? A real family, a safe place, a chance to heal? Jonas stared at her, the idea taking shape in his mind. The ranch was big enough. The house could be expanded. They had land to work, skills to teach, and most importantly, they had experience surviving trauma and coming out the other side. You want to turn the ranch into a home for orphans, he said slowly. A small one? Rosie said quickly. Maybe 3 or 4 children to start. Just the ones who need it most, who have nowhere else to go. We could give them work to do, honest work that teaches them skills, and family dinners and bedtime stories and everything I dreamed about when I was locked in that barn eating scraps. Clara would love it, Jonas said, the idea growing on him. She's been asking for brothers and sisters since she could talk. And we'd be together, Rosie said. You and me and Clara and whoever else needs us. We'd be a family, just a bigger one. Jonas pulled her close, his mind already racing with possibilities. They'd need to build another room, maybe 2. They'd need more supplies, more food stores. He'd have to hire help with the ranch work since his time would be divided. But it was doable. More than doable. It felt right, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. We'll do it, he said. We'll talk to Marshal Clayton, find out which children need homes most desperately. We'll start small, like you said, make sure we can handle it. And then we'll see where the wind takes us, Rosie finished, smiling up at him. You sound like Clara, Jonas said, but he was smiling too. Maybe Clara's onto something, Rosie said. Maybe sometimes you have to trust things you can't quite explain. They sat together in comfortable silence, planning their future, until the cold drove them inside. That night, for the first time since Jonas had found her in that burlap sack, Rosie slept without nightmares. When morning came, they began the work of building something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. 3 months later, the McCord Ranch looked different. A new wing had been added to the house, 2 rooms for children with a shared washroom between. The barn had been expanded to accommodate more animals, and in the front yard a sign hung from a newly planted post. McCord Family Home, where every child belongs. The first child to arrive was Emily Hartman, the 7-year-old girl who'd stopped singing. She came with a government escort, her eyes dead and her mouth locked shut. Clara took one look at her and declared, "She's my sister now. I'm going to teach her to talk to the wind." It took weeks before Emily spoke a single word. But slowly, painfully, with Clara's patient friendship and Rosie's understanding care and Jonas's gentle strength, the little girl began to heal. One morning, Jonas heard humming coming from the garden, soft and uncertain, but unmistakably a hymn. Emily didn't sing yet, but she hummed, and that was a start. The second child was a boy named Thomas, 10 years old and angry at the world. He'd been worked nearly to death on a ranch down south, beaten when he was too slow, starved when he was too defiant. He arrived expecting more of the same and was shocked when Jonas put him to work alongside him rather than over him, teaching him the difference between labor and slavery. "You work because you're part of this family," Jonas explained, showing Thomas how to properly mend a fence. "And families take care of each other. You do your share. You get your share. Nobody here is less than anyone else." It took months for Thomas to believe it, but eventually the anger faded into something softer. He started calling Jonas sir instead of glaring silently. He started helping Clara with her chores without being asked. And one day he called Rosie Ma, and then looked shocked by his own boldness. "That's all right," Rosie said gently. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." The third and fourth children came together, siblings named Sarah and Michael, who'd been separated for 2 years and were terrified of being split up again. They were quiet and watchful, always holding hands, always positioned where they could see all exits. Clara decided they needed her protection and rarely left their sides, telling them stories about the wind and the horses and how Papa had found Mama in a sack and saved her. "Papa's good at saving people," Clara explained with the confidence of a 5-year-old who believed her father could do anything. And Mama's good at making people feel safe. So you're going to be okay now." Slowly, impossibly, they were. Sarah started helping Rosie in the kitchen, learning to make bread and stew and pie. Michael gravitated toward the barn, discovering a gift with animals that had Jonas talking about making him a junior wrangler. And at night, when the whole household gathered around the big table Jonas had built to accommodate them all, they looked almost like a real family, messy and imperfect and healing together. Spring came, and with it, news from Marshall Clayton. Of the 47 children sold from Hollow Creek, they'd recovered 39. 3 had died, worked to death, or killed by their buyers. 5 remained missing, but the search continued. The trafficking network had been completely dismantled, with arrests made as far east as St. Louis and as far west as San Francisco. The Daniel Morrison Home for Children had opened in Cheyenne, funded by seized assets from the conspirators and donations from guilt-stricken citizens who'd looked the other way for too long. "You did that," Jonas told Rosie as they read the letter together on the porch while the children played in the yard. "You saved them all." "We did that," Rosie corrected. "You saved me first. Everything else came from that." "I just found you," Jonas said. "You did the rest." "No," Rosie said firmly. "You chose to stop. Chose to open that sack when you could have ridden past. Chose to believe me when everyone else thought I was a criminal. Chose to risk everything to protect me. Don't diminish that." Jonas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, soap and sunshine and home. "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now that he'd said them a dozen times before. "I love your strength and your courage and the way you've turned our house into a home. I love how you are with the children, how you see their pain because you lived it yourself. I love you too," Rosie interrupted, kissing him softly. "More than I thought I could love anything after what I went through. You gave me back my life. You gave me a family. You gave me a purpose. How could I not love you?" From the yard, Clara's voice rang out, "Papa! Mama! Come see! Emily's singing!" They rushed outside to find the children gathered in a circle, and in the center stood Emily with her face turned toward the sun, singing a hymn in a voice that was thin but true. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since she'd arrived. "She said the wind told her it was time," Clara explained, beaming with pride. "She said the wind said she was safe now. She could sing again." Rosie's hand found Jonas's, squeezing tight. Around them, damaged children were learning to play and laugh and trust. Above them, the Wyoming sky stretched endless and blue. And between them flowed something that felt like grace, unearned, unexpected, and infinitely precious. That summer, on a day when the wildflowers bloomed in such profusion that the whole ranch looked painted, Jonas and Rosie were married. The ceremony was held under the sycamore tree at Hollow Creek, the same tree where Rosie had buried the ledgers that saved so many lives. Marshall Clayton had arranged it, turning the sight of so much suffering into something beautiful. The orphanage ruins had been torn down, the grounds replanted with gardens. In the center, where the old building once stood, a memorial had been erected listing the names of every child who'd been sold and the 2 who'd died trying to save them, Daniel and Grace, forever remembered. The whole town of Red Willow turned out for the wedding, their earlier shame transformed into support. Mrs. Johnson stood as Rosie's matron of honor, tears streaming down her weathered face. Dawson gave Rosie away, his voice gruff with emotion. And Clara served as flower girl, scattering petals with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed and cried at the same time. The preacher was a circuit rider known for his plain speaking and good heart. He didn't mention trials or tragedy or the darkness they'd survived. Instead, he talked about courage and second chances and the way love could grow in the most unlikely places. "Marriage," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "is the courage to stay when the world says run. It's the strength to build when everything's been torn down. It's the faith to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, no matter how dark yesterday was." Jonas and Rosie have that courage, that strength, that faith. They've proven it by surviving what would have destroyed lesser people. And today, they're proving it again by choosing each other, by choosing family, by choosing hope over fear. Jonas took Rosie's hands, his own trembling slightly. She wore a simple ivory dress, Mrs.
Johnson had made, wildflowers woven into her dark hair. The bruises were long gone, the scars fading. But it wasn't her appearance that took his breath away. It was the light in her eyes, the joy that radiated from her, the absolute certainty in her face as she looked at him. "You didn't just survive," Jonas said, speaking his vows from his heart rather than from memory. "You brought us back to life. Me and Clara, we were going through motions, marking time. Then you came along and reminded us what it means to truly live. You showed us that broken things can be mended, that lost things can be found, and that sometimes the wind really does know what it's talking about." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "I promise to love you every day of my life, to stand with you against whatever comes, to build a family with you, not just the one we have, but the one we'll continue growing, and to never, ever take for granted the miracle of having found you." Rosie's tears were falling freely now, catching the sunlight like diamonds. "I didn't believe in miracles," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "I'd seen too much darkness, survived too much pain, but you taught me that miracles aren't always about grand gestures or divine intervention. Sometimes they're as simple as someone choosing to stop, to look, to care when they could just as easily ride past. You saved my life that morning under the sycamore tree. But more than that, you gave me reasons to want to live it. You and Clara, you showed me what family really means. Not blood or obligation, but choice. Choosing each other every day, choosing to stay, choosing to love, even when it's hard. I promise to honor that choice. To be the wife you deserve, the mother Clara and the other children need, and the partner you can count on through whatever storms come. Because they will come. That's life. But we'll face them together." The preacher smiled. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jonas, you may kiss your bride." Jonas pulled Rosie close and kissed her as the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Claire was jumping up and down, shouting, "Mama and Papa are married, I told you. The wind told me they would be." Emily was singing, her voice pure and clear. Thomas and Michael were grinning, looking more like children and less like survivors, and Sarah was crying happy tears, clutching Mrs. Johnson's hand. The reception was held back at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, food contributed by half the county. There was music and dancing and laughter that went on until the stars came out. Jonas danced with Rosie, then with Clara, then with each of the other children until they were all dizzy and giggling. Rosie was passed from partner to partner, Dawson, Clayton, even old Doc Morrison, who'd pronounced her healed and whole. As the evening wore on and the children began to tire, they gathered around the big table one last time. Jonas stood, raising his glass of cider. "I want to thank you all for being here today," he said, "for standing with us, supporting us, and helping us build something good from the ashes of something evil. But mostly I want to thank my wife." He paused, savoring the word. "For being the bravest person I've ever known, for refusing to stay silent when silence would have been safer, for fighting to save children she'd never met, and for choosing us, choosing this life, when she could have chosen easier roads." "To Rosie," the crowd echoed, glasses raised. "And to Clara," Rosie added, standing beside Jonas, "for listening to the wind, for believing in miracles, and for deciding on day one that I was her mama. Sometimes children see truth better than adults. She saw what we were too blind to recognize, that we belonged together." "To Clara!" the crowd cheered. Clara stood on her chair, her face glowing with pride. "And to our family," she announced, "the one we got and the one we made. Because the wind says families come in all shapes and sizes, and ours is going to keep growing until everyone who needs a home has one." The applause was deafening. Jonas met Rosie's eyes across the table and saw his own joy reflected there. The joy of people who'd been given a second chance and weren't wasting a single moment of it. Years passed. The McCord family home grew and changed, accommodating more children, more stories, more healing. Some stayed permanently, becoming McCords in all but blood. Others healed enough to move on, to find their own paths. But all of them carried something precious away. The knowledge that they mattered, that they were worthy of love, that their past didn't define their futures. Jonas built additions until the house sprawled across the hilltop like a small village. Rosie taught the children to read and write, to cook and sew, to recognize their own worth.
Clara grew into a young woman who could still hear the wind and never stopped believing in miracles. And together, they created something that transcended their individual tragedies. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, by love that refused to be extinguished no matter how dark the world became. On Clara's 10th birthday, the family gathered under the sycamore tree that had witnessed both horror and healing, death and rebirth. There were 15 children now, ranging from tiny 3-year-old Grace, named for the woman who died at Hollow Creek, to 17-year-old Thomas, who was about to leave for university. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Grace said, climbing into Rosie's lap. "Tell us how Papa found you." Rosie looked at Jonas, who nodded. It was a story they told often, a testament to survival and hope and the unexpected ways grace could enter your life. "Once upon a time," Rosie began, her voice carrying to all the children gathered around, "there was a girl who was lost and broken and left to die. She was stuffed in a burlap sack and thrown away like garbage because she'd done something brave. She'd told the truth when lying would have been easier. But the world wasn't done with her yet. Because on that same morning, a cowboy and his daughter were riding their fence line, and the daughter, who could hear things others couldn't, knew someone needed help." "That was me," Clara said proudly. "I heard the wind singing about someone who was sleeping." "You did," Rosie agreed, smiling. "And you led your papa straight to that sycamore tree. And when he opened that sack and saw what had been done to me, he didn't turn away. He didn't decide it was too much trouble or too dangerous. He chose to help. He chose to care. He chose to be brave when brave was the hardest thing to be." "And then what happened?" Grace asked, even though she'd heard this story 100 times. "Then miracles happened," Jonas said, picking up the tale. "Your mama survived. She remembered things she'd forgotten. She stood up to bad men and made them face justice. She saved children who needed saving, and somewhere in all that fighting and surviving and healing, we fell in love." "And then you got married under this tree," Grace said. "And then we built a family," Rosie said. "Not just the 3 of us, but all of you. Every single one of you is part of this miracle. Every single one of you proved that broken things can be mended, that lost things can be found, and that families are made by love, not blood." "What happened to the bad men?" one of the younger boys asked. "They face justice," Jonas said simply. "They can't hurt anyone anymore. And the children they hurt, some of them are right here with us. Some are in other loving homes, and some—" He paused, his voice heavy. "Some we couldn't save, but we remember them. We honor them by making sure what happened to them never happens again." The children were quiet for a moment, processing this. Then Clara stood, brushing off her skirt. "I think we should make a promise," she announced. "All of us, together. We should promise that when we grow up and have families of our own, we'll remember this. We'll remember that everyone deserves a chance, that broken people can heal, and that sometimes saving one person can change the whole world." "That's a big promise," Thomas said, but he was smiling. "Big promises are important," Clara said with the wisdom of someone who'd grown up watching miracles unfold. "So who's with me?" Every hand went up. Children who'd been beaten, abandoned, sold, forgotten. Children who'd found their way to this ranch and this family through paths dark and twisted. Children who were learning that their stories didn't have to end in tragedy, that new chapters could be written, that hope was always possible if you were brave enough to reach for it. "Then let's promise," Clara said, "on this spot where Mama was almost destroyed and chose to fight instead. Where bad things happened but good things grew. We promise to be brave, to be kind, to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, and to never, ever give up on each other." "We promise," they said in unison, their voices rising into the Wyoming sky where the wind caught them and carried them across the prairie, across the mountains, across the territory, and beyond. That night, long after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Jonas found Rosie standing in the yard, looking up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and she leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his chest. "Do you ever think about that morning?" he asked quietly. "About how close we came to never having this?" "Every day," Rosie admitted. "Every single day I wake up and remember that I'm alive when I shouldn't be. That I have a family when I thought I'd always be alone. That I matter to people who chose to love me when no one would have blamed them for walking away." "I think about it too," Jonas said. I think about how my life was just going through motions until Clara heard the wind and led me to you. How everything changed in the moment I opened that sack. How choosing to care instead of walking away gave me back everything I'd lost when Martha died, and more besides. Do you think Martha would approve? Rosie asked, a question she'd never quite voiced before. Of me. Of us. Of what we've built here. Jonas was quiet for a long moment, considering. Martha believed in signs, he finally said. She believed the world spoke to those who listened. And I think she'd say that Clara hearing the wind wasn't coincidence. That you being left on our land of all places wasn't random chance. That maybe she had a hand in bringing you to us, in making sure Clara wasn't alone, in making sure I remembered how to love. You think she sent me? Rosie's voice was skeptical but hopeful. I think love doesn't end just because life does, Jonas said. I think Martha loved Clara and me enough to want us to be happy even after she was gone. And I think if she could choose someone to care for her daughter and stand beside her husband, she'd choose someone exactly like you, brave and kind and damaged enough to understand what healing really means. Rosie turned in his arms, her eyes shining with tears. I hope you're right. I hope she knows how much I love them. Love you and Clara. I hope she knows I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift she gave me. You already are, Jonas said, kissing her forehead. You were worthy the moment you survived. Everything since has just been proof. They stood together under the stars, two people who'd been broken and remade, who'd faced darkness and chosen light, who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. Around them, the ranch slept, a house full of children who'd found safety, a barn full of animals cared for with love, gardens planted with hope for future harvests. What do you think comes next? Rosie asked. We've got 15 children now. The house is bursting. Do we stop here? Do you want to stop? Jonas asked. Rosie laughed softly. No, there's always room for one more. There's always another child who needs saving. But Jonas, we're not young anymore. We've got gray hair and creaking joints and responsibilities that would terrify most people. And we've got love enough for 100 children, Jonas said. We've got experience surviving impossible things. We've got Clara to help us, and Thomas is talking about coming back after university to run the ranch side while we focus on the children. We've got everything we need except more hours in the day. So we keep going, Rosie said. We keep going, Jonas agreed, until we can't anymore. And then our children will keep going after us. That's legacy, Rosie. That's what survives when we're gone. Not buildings or money, but the love we put out into the world through the children we save. The McCord legacy, Rosie said, testing the words. Not bad for a girl who was left in a sack to die. Not bad for a cowboy who almost rode past the most important moment of his life, Jonas countered. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Behind them, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying their story across the prairie. And if you listened carefully, if you had the gift Clara possessed, the gift Martha had passed down, the gift Rosie had discovered in herself, you could hear in that wind a song of hope, of healing, of families forged in fire and tempered by love. The girl who'd been abandoned in a burlap sack had become a mother to dozens. The cowboy who'd chosen to stop had built a legacy of compassion. And the little girl who talked to the wind had shown them all that miracles weren't just possible, they were inevitable, if you were brave enough to believe and strong enough to fight for them. Years later, when Jonas and Rosie were old and gray, when their house had sheltered over 100 children, when their story had become legend across the territory, someone asked Rosie what she'd learned from everything she'd endured. She thought for a long moment, her weathered hand clasped in Jonas's. Their great-grandchildren, blood and chosen both, playing in the yard Clara had once run through alone. I learned that darkness doesn't last forever, she said finally. That love is stronger than hate, that courage is contagious, and that sometimes the worst moments of your life are just the beginning of the best chapters. I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up day after day, choosing each other over and over. And I learned, she looked at Jonas, her eyes bright with emotion. I learned that being saved once doesn't mean you're done. It means you have the responsibility to save others, to pass the grace forward, to make sure your suffering means something by preventing others from suffering the same way. What would you tell that girl in the burlap sack if you could go back? Someone asked. Rosie smiled, thinking of that terrified young woman who'd thought her life was over. I'd tell her to hold on. I'd tell her that someone is coming who will choose to care when caring is hardest. I'd tell her that her story isn't over. It's just beginning. And I'd tell her that one day she'll stand under a Wyoming sky, surrounded by children she saved the way she was saved. And she'll understand that every dark moment, every beating, every terror was worth surviving to get to this moment of peace and love and belonging. And what would you tell Jonas? They asked. I'd tell him thank you, Rosie said simply, squeezing his hand. Thank you for stopping. Thank you for caring. Thank you for choosing courage over convenience. Thank you for giving me back my life and then making it worth living. Jonas pulled her close, kissing her temple. Best decision I ever made, he said. Clara told me you were supposed to be there. The wind told her. And for once, I was smart enough to listen. The sun set over the McCord Ranch that evening, painting everything gold and amber. In the house, children laughed and argued and lived the normal, beautiful, chaotic life of family. In the barn, horses nickered contentedly. In the garden, flowers bloomed where once there had been only weeds. And under the sycamore tree where Rosie had buried the ledgers that saved so many lives, where Jonas had proposed marriage, where the family gathered each year to remember how it all began, a new marker had been placed. It read simply, "Here lies the past. May we never forget it. May we never repeat it. May we honor those who suffered by building a future where all children are safe, loved, and free." The story that began with a girl in a burlap sack ended with a family that spanned generations, a legacy of love that transformed a territory, and the proof that even the darkest evil could be overcome by ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. And sometimes, if the wind was right and you listened carefully, you could still hear Clara's voice, older now, but no less certain, telling new children the story of how Mama came home, how Papa saved her, how they built something beautiful from ashes and pain, how they proved that families are made, not born, and how sometimes the wind really does know things we don't. It knows that love endures, that hope survives, that grace is always possible, and that the courage to stop, to care, to choose compassion over convenience can change not just one life, but hundreds, can transform not just one family, but an entire community, can prove not just that miracles exist, but that we create them. One choice, one act of kindness, one life saved at a time. That was the McCord legacy. That was the story of the girl in the sack and the cowboy who saved her. And that was proof that even in the darkest corners of the world, light could take root and grow if someone was brave enough to plant it.